All right. So here we are with another episode of Just Your Average Gaming Podcast, where just a bunch of average white dudes talk about video games, I guess. And today we're going to talk about RPGs of all walks of life and in all facets. So it's going to be a pretty open-ended discussion, I think. We'll just kind of go with the flow, unless people have specific ideas. Feel free to bring them up. But we can start off by just saying, just an opening statement on RPGs and, broadly say what an RPG is to you and what your favorite one is. And Louis, you can go first.
What was the question?
What? Gosh, you're supposed to listen now. What is an RPG to you, and what is that
Role
mean?
playing game. All right.
Yeah.
What is it? What is a nice all-encompassing definition for role playing game and my favorite one?
Yeah, and then from there,
Role playing game
dive in.
is a game, as RPG says it. It's a game about role play. So in other words, it's a game where as a player, you get to have fun shaping a character, kind of like it's Play-Doh. And you get to do that by making meaningful choice. It doesn't have to be the kind of choice that has a huge impact on the cinematic of the ending, but they have to be choices that say something about who the character is behind the simple few lines of text that you get from just playing the game or talking to the other players and other companions. They have to be choices that paint a bigger, broader picture of some of his values and some of his interests. So I don't believe the perfect RPG does exist, but I think Mass Effect is probably the one that I can coin as being my contender for top-notch RPG.
Yeah, I think we can definitely all agree that Mass Effect is at least at or near the top of all our lists. What about you, Julian?
So I'm going to be a little controversial here, but I think that RPGs, as the name it suggests, so role-playing games, I think all that matters is that you play a character, and I think that would pretty much include any video game where the protagonist that you can play
Is a person.
if it's a character, if you play a character in a game, I think it's technically speaking a role-playing game. I think that the common idea of a role-playing game is more like, okay, experience points, level ups, and that's pretty much like how the public views it. But I think that what's happened is that we've fragmented it into all these different subgenres. So we have CRPGs, JRPGs, Western RPGs. We have a whole bunch of variety. It's become a catch-all because it's hard to pin down what it is. So action RPGs are quite common, but to me, I think at the end of the day, role playing means even the first Assassin's Creed or even the first Zelda is technically a role playing game because we're role playing as that character, or Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto. But yeah, in an ideal world, we could use the genre to help separate it from other games and really start to see what games are what in a pile of random games. Just as a means to separate them. So if I took the traditional sense of what an RPG is, maybe based off of tabletop traditional RPGs, I would then have to agree with Louis and say that my favorite RPG would be Mass Effect.
Yeah, because a problem I have with your definition, and I mean, it's a very minor problem, but it's still there, is that it's not a very useful definition because it doesn't really help separate effectively as to what is and isn't, because then everything is, or almost. Tetris is not an RPG, but Tetris is just about the most abstract video game you can play. So yeah, there's definitely discussion to be had around that definition.
Yeah, we can
something to work with, definitely.
We'll definitely jump into that at some point. Dan, would you like to go?
I mean, what an RPG means to me, and my favorite one. I mean, Julian kind of touched on a lot of what I was going to bring up, specifically Zelda. You know, that was I feel like most of us here, we've all played Zelda, right? Like Jacob, you played a bit of Breath of the Wild, right?
Well, I finished Breath of the Wild, but that's the only.
Yeah,
Zelda.
and Breath of
Yeah,
the Wild is
but
a
I did
very
finish
Zelda
it.
experience, so
Yeah.
it's a good experience that you have.
Well, it's a very Zelda. Well, anyways, there's the whole dungeon discussion.
Let's me in the club.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just say that if you had played something like Minish Cap and you said, "Yeah, I've played Zelda," I'd be like, "Yeah, more than some, less than others."
That's the first one I beat.
Yeah.
Minish Cap was great. Don't get me wrong.
Man, Minish Cap was your first. Man, that's crazy. I was an Ocarina boy.
I was a Zelda boy.
Uh,
The Legend of Zelda. Period.
Good times.
Awesome times.
My favorite RPG and what they are. I mean, like, anything where you build characters, but like, I don't know if just putting stats into a character counts as building them. You know what I mean? I feel like
By the modern definition of it, it would be.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
nowadays, any game that has even the slightest hint of a level up mechanic is considered an RPG. And that's where I have an issue with the definition. I don't
Yeah.
think that that's enough to constitute RPG.
no.
It's not meaningful choice.
So you said Mass Effect, right? As your
Yeah,
favorite.
that was my go-to example.
I could agree with that, and then I'd take it a step further and say that my favorite game, and even by the same fucking creators, was
KOTOR.
KOTOR,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Knights of the Old Republic.
I
like-
haven't played that game, so I can't.
Oh,
But I've heard only good things, so
Same here.
it
I can
had
understand.
it had character building. It had the alignment system, which I'm sure we'll touch on later for RPGs
For
and
sure.
whether or not alignments were necessary. And it had stat building. It had meta builds. It kind of appealed to a broad variety of gamers, which is exactly what I think the RPG genre does. I feel like it gets tossed around a lot because like a lot of these games have similarities, and it's not really just a concrete. It's not a concrete answer.
It
at the end
got
of the day,
tossed
what it is.
around like Souls-like is getting tossed around every time a Souls game or something
A
close
difficult
to.
game, yeah.
This game's
Yeah.
tough. It's a Souls-like. Like, come on.
And Souls likes are RPGs, so it gets even
They
bigger.
are.
Yeah,
In
they
many ways,
definitely
they
are. In some ways more so than
Action
other
or
games too,
action
you know,
adventure
like,
RPGs.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Jacob, your take?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you
all
got?
right. Well, for me, I think like the most important thing is I kind of build a bit of what you're all saying. I definitely, well, except for you, Julian, I definitely don't agree with your broad
Yeah.
view of it. Like I love Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur Morgan's probably one of my favorite protagonists, but it's not an RPG.
Reading a story is not roleplay.
I'll talk about that.
And even though you can like, because that's the thing, like you can alter like a few things, right? Like in Red Dead and some other games like it. But another one I could bring up, and this is a game I also love, but I'm not sure, at least in regards to impacting story, I would call it an RPG, except for the very end, Ghost of Tsushima, as well. You know, like you
God,
don't.
I still gotta play that.
Yeah. But I guess for me, the most important thing is like playing the role of the character, but also like having a significant impact on the narrative. Whether you're like the center of the universe hero, like Shepard in Mass Effect, or just a moody Witcher in The Witcher, going around doing your thing. To me, impact in the story and impact in the world is what truly gives a role to me the role playing experience. Because like, how are you role playing if your actions that you're role playing aren't actually changing anything or manifesting in any meaningful way? So yeah, and my favorite RPG is also Knights of the Old Republic, but I'll leave Dan to kind of sing its praises, and I'll as usual use The Witcher as my, because right after that it's like there's Mass Effect, there's KOTOR, there's The Witcher, like so. Yeah. So,
But is The Witcher really an RPG? I haven't played
yeah.
enough to know, so you'll have to tell me.
absolutely, yeah. It doesn't have like, again, it's something else we can get into because and this may change what defines an RPG for some people, but it's also comes down to how you view like the character you're playing as,
Blank
because
slate.
there's a blank slate and there's like predetermined, right? And like a game like Skyrim, you're 100% a blank slate, whereas a game like
The Eternal
Sekiro,
Prisoner.
you're 100% predetermined.
Yeah.
And then you have games like The Witcher, where you're a predetermined character, but you're still impacting the story, still making decisions on that character's behalf within
Or
the
in a game
boundaries
like
of what
Dark
makes sense.
Souls.
Yeah.
or in a game like Dark Souls, where your character has a form of backstory, but it's usually kept pretty obscure and somewhat irrelevant to the actual circumstances of the game.
Much like
Yeah.
Skyrim.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're kind of left to fill in the blanks yourself, and in that sense, that may be the truer RPG experience. But yeah, I'd still say games like if you're telling me The Witcher 3 is on an RPG, then whatever arguments you make, I will make against Mass Effect on the same level.
Okay, well, I wouldn't know. I haven't played The Witcher 3 enough to make a
Yeah,
call
even
on
The
whether
Witcher
it
1
is or
though,
not.
I'd say is 100% an RPG.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
And I know you've played that one at least.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I
you are
can- I
playing
can-
the role
I
of
can-
Geralt, but I mean, you could say that about a lot of
Playing
games.
a role, playing a
know?
role doesn't make
But
it
that
role
definition,
play.
Call of Duty, is
Yeah, but that's what I'm
game,
saying.
playing
But
ghosts
there's
and-
a difference between that's why I don't put Red Dead in that discussion.
Like
For
I
that
said,
exact
reading
reason.
a
But I'm
story
saying The
doesn't
Witcher
make it
offer.
roleplay.
Yeah, but Witcher is not that at all. The Witcher, you're very much involved in the story, like as much. It's just to very many degrees, if not more so, than Mass Effect.
But okay, I'd like to just be a shit disturber for a second here.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's why you're
So
here.
So yeah, I don't like my definition either, but I still think that it's a worthy discussion, and I think that it could work because I want to talk about Red Dead Redemption for 1 second, okay?
Yeah,
I don't think
Please.
when I think RPGs, I don't think like, oh, Red Dead Redemption is like the most. Dungeons and Dragons, Red Dead, two peas in a pod. Those work together. No, but with the reason I'm bringing that up is because of how muddy this definition is. When you're talking about things like Witcher 3, Geralt is a predetermined character. You still have decisions you make that affect the world. Okay, but how far are we willing to go with that? Because when you're playing as Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2, yeah, you don't have any stats pages, fine. Your dialogue choices are pretty limited. You don't really get to pick those. However, you can still look at some small things that happen in that game and think, how would I roleplay Arthur Morgan? When I'm walking in a scene in a forest and a guy's like, please help me. They stole my money or they stole my horse and they left me here to die. You still choose how something like that goes. Do you save him? Do you shoot him? Do you rob him? Like, there's a lot of ways to approach that. There's ways to approach, do you rob stores? Are you good Arthur or are you bad Arthur? There's even different endings based on that. So, like, he still has a flexible character to some degree on what he does. Hell, even Grand Theft Auto 5, the ending lets you choose an ending, even if that's not much.
Yeah.
It's just that where do we draw the line on, like, yeah, it's a predetermined character, which still counts, but how much decision is too little decision? And it's open world. Between missions, you're really just doing things the way you want to do them,
Yeah.
right? Does Trevor murder everybody? Does Trevor... Well, Trevor usually murders everybody, but
I mean,
Yeah, he definitely does.
it's kind of built into who he is.
Yeah, if you're not murdering everybody as Trevor, you're playing it wrong.
But actually, no.
maybe
No, sorry. Continue.
I was just gonna say maybe Franklin and Michael, you make do the same thing too. Like it's up to you.
Yeah, I will actually agree with Julian on this. If anything, like I feel like the Grand Theft Auto games, and yeah, definitely more specifically the Red Dead Redemption games, it's kind of a similar feel to what I got when I played The Witcher. Briefly, though, how it was, like this is still a predetermined character. Things will still happen. You can kind of shape their decisions. But I mean, in both games, you're playing the role of the main character. I would say that they're kind of equal on the scale of what is a true RPG, if you will. Whereas something like KOTOR, it's literally here's a blank slate, and there are obviously different endings to different things, and like I've gone back and played this game like 4 or 5 times, and every single time I finish that game, there are a few preset endings, but generally I'm a different person. Different events have happened. Maybe some crew members are alive and some aren't.
Yeah, well, I could say the exact same thing about The Witcher. And you could say they're almost the same comparing to KOTOR, because when you think about it, KOTOR, you are a predetermined character. You just don't know it right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true. Okay.
And the best RPGs are the ones that find a way to balance those two things. KOTOR, Planescape, The Witcher 1, because you have amnesia. That's why it's a great segue from the books to the games. And I agree, there's a line to be drawn, but to say that Red Dead and Witcher walk the same line, I think, is absurd.
Poppycock.
Yeah.
But you'll need to draw the line.
Yeah, that's the thing. There is a line to be drawn, and I think Ghost of Tsushima walks that line almost. Probably is my best example of I can't even decide necessarily one way or the other, because it's got like unlocks and equipment and stuff. But it's really, it's the question is like, is it an RPG or is it an action adventure?
RPG element doesn't make RPG.
Well, that's the
In my
question then. What
opinion.
does make RPG? Because that's where you have to draw the line then. So what would you guys argue? Makes what makes a game an RPG instead of an action adventure? Why did CD Projekt Red start calling Cyberpunk an action adventure instead of an RPG?
I guess choice and impact on the story, which is why I would argue that Mass Effect 1 and 2 are RPGs and Mass Effect 3 is in the action adventure.
Yeah, but for those exact reasons, I'd argue The Witcher is an RPG because like they really have a lot of ways to
obviously it's an RPG for sure, but I mean, at the same time, so is, I guess, technically Red Dead Redemption, because you are a character, you get to make different choices. There's like alignments, there are different endings. You are playing the role of this cowboy, and like, yeah, for sure, there's definitely more of a preset story, and things will end a certain way. Whereas The Witcher, I'll definitely give it. It has more endings, and like, gameplay is, from what I understand, it's affected as you're playing it, right?
Yeah.
So
the world changes around you. Every quest.
But
has
how much
multiple
of
outcomes.
how much of those changes paint a picture of who Geralt is as a person and where his values stand?
Oh, I finally found the goddamn
Choosing
thing.
to help or not to help someone can be a really multifaceted question, but ultimately, like a question like in Mass Effect, saving or not the Rachni Queen. That paints a huge picture about who Shepard is, because it either paints him as someone who's capable of forgiveness and who's capable of giving chances, or it's gonna paint him as someone who's like absolutely incapable of forgetting the past in many ways, and who's just gonna kill for the sake of like protecting, even if it's protecting kind of blindly, because he doesn't have any other than information on the Rachni War. He wasn't there to live it himself. So but again, I don't know enough about Witcher 3 to determine.
Julian, maybe you could back me up here, but I'd say there's many examples of that, especially in The Witcher 3.
Yes, I can't even begin what to choose one. No, The Witcher 3 is full of like many meaningful decisions, and also has ending impacts because of that. And characters' lives are also on the line a lot. So Witcher 3 probably has more of that than the previous two games in the series, for sure. And
overall,
it stands up. It stands up as if we're talking about meaningful choices, yes, Witcher 3 is full of many meaningful choices.
Cool. But
I still wanna mess with you guys a little bit here. I wanna ruin everything.
Good.
So let's take a look at this. So your newest definition. So you're saying meaningful choices that affect the world and the characters seem to be a pretty important factor for RPGs.
For me, it's the only factor, really.
Okay.
Playing a role doesn't make it roleplay. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
Playing a role is like akin to reading a story. The appeal of roleplay is that you get to create a story. Playing a role doesn't allow for that.
And that's kind of where you draw the line between RPG and action adventure.
Technically, the only true RPGs that can ever exist are board and table games like D&D.
So that's the extreme of an RPG, is the tabletop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Its purest form would be the tabletop.
So when we talk about meaningful choices, gameplay, you're excluding gameplay because the moment-to-moment gameplay can go in like an infinite number of directions.
Yeah.
So that doesn't count. It has to be a narrative-based decision.
Yeah.
Just to help clarify here.
Yeah.
So that would mean
at least
that
a character-based one.
Okay, so that would mean that Zelda, for example, is not a role-playing game.
No.
Okay.
I was going to say before, when I played Breath of the Wild, I never got RPG vibe from it. It's like there's mechanics, but but yeah, it's not compared to like the things we're talking about.
So
It's
Final
definitely
Fantasy 15 is not an RPG.
Well, I haven't played, so I can't say.
Most of the recent Final Fantasies weren't RPGs.
Okay.
And when
What
I say
about
recent,
Dragon
I
Quest?
mean like Final Fantasy 3 onwards.
But so
And
Dragon
some
Quest.
of them kind of delved back into it. Final Fantasy 12 was more of an RPG than most of its predecessors.
Do you get to make meaningful decisions as your
You get
characters?
to make meaningful choices about who your character become.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
So 10 isn't then. 10
No.
isn't an RPG.
No, 10 is an epic story.
Okay. I just feel like you see, but what's happening here is that I'm trying to tear it apart because basically by that logic, Red Dead Redemption 2 becomes an RPG because of the meaningful decisions you're making in that game. You can't make
Yeah.
a decision in Final Fantasy 10. So that makes Final Fantasy 10 not an RPG, but Red Dead becomes an RPG, or Infamous becomes an RPG.
Oh, Infamous! My God. Yeah, I guess that does kind of broaden the horizon.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with RPGs is that there really is no right answer to it. you
It
know?
definitely is a very broad definition,
Yeah.
and I don't know that it hurts the genre to keep such a broad definition. I personally would like to see that definition narrowed down a little bit. Like, if only for the sake of the industry, to just stop calling everything RPGs and actually help people know what the hell they're getting their hands on.
I think definitions in general are very hard, and I think that's why we have so many variations of RPG, like action RPG, CRPG, JRPG, is because each one has its own we have our own understanding of what that implies, right? JRPG usually implies turn-based numbers and strong anime style characters,
Yeah.
whereas CRPG is maybe more inspired by tabletop D&D games. So we have that's there to help us kind of parse through it, because otherwise role-playing game, like if you ignore any sort of preconceived notions of what an RPG means to you personally, and someone who's never played a video game sees role-playing game, a game that has role-play, it becomes impossibly broad. Like it just explodes
Yeah.
on itself.
Because then again, it becomes, what do you define as being role play?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like literally every game is a role playing game because you are playing a role. It's inherent in playing games, so you have to like kind of disassociate the fact that yes, technically every game's a role playing game because we know that by role playing we mean something more than just, shooting things in a corridor just because you're playing the role of a Marine, but it's not a role playing game. And I think that's why technically your super broad definition is right, but it's kind
not
of just
a wrong definition.
it's a fallacy
just
of our
not a very
language.
useful definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
We
yeah,
don't
I
have
know
the
it's
words to
useless.
distinguish because everything in a game is technically a role playing game.
But that's what the whole problem is. That's why I'm doing this, is because I'm trying to show you guys that it's chaos. Like if you try to nail down RPG as a genre, because I think that at one point, I think people did call Zelda on the NES. They did consider that an absolute
RPG, yeah.
RPG.
Yeah.
And now it's more of you probably think in terms of as a typical gamer, we're gonna think, Zelda, that's an adventure game. That makes sense. as
Yeah,
an
it pretty
adventure
much gave birth to the genre of adventure.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but the thing is that definitions are messy, and with what's happening now, it's technically Spider-Man also becomes kind of RPG-ish with its leveling. It becomes an action RPG, and then the term RPG is tacked on there also. Far Cry did it. Far Cry 3 added in all those skill trees, and people are like, "Oh, it's an action RPG." And now after that, I remember that was kind of where the dams exploded and the floodgates opened. It's like, "Oh, Far Cry 3 is an RPG," and I'm like,
Skyrim with
"Okay,
guns.
that's it." Yeah, exactly.
Skyrim with gun.
Once that happened, it was
The
game
classic.
over.
Yeah.
Everything's an RPG. It's it's done. It's over. Go home, guys. The definition's been destroyed.
Yeah.
There's no such thing anymore.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, if
yeah, I
that's the
think we need
case,
to-
sorry, go ahead.
It's all good. I'm just saying that I think that at that point, you need to really set some strong boundaries, and it becomes really difficult because you start to accidentally exclude games that technically are RPGs, and then if you change it, then you start to
If
include
in the
games that aren't.
process of crafting a definition, you wind up excluding games, you can't feel sorry because you feel like these games should belong. You either rework the definition or accept that these games aren't the RPGs you thought they were.
But the opposite will also happen, right? You'll also include games.
You'll
that
also
maybe-
include games that might not belong or that you might not feel belong, but if they do by default of how you made your definition, then the definition is what it is.
I guess so. that depends on what the definition is in the end, right?
Yeah,
It depends.
and ultimately that's what it comes down to. Like in the process of crafting a definition, of course you'll want to look at a corpus of games and like try to inspire yourself from the elements that stand out as being common amongst all of them. But ultimately, in the process of doing so, you might end up including and excluding games that you wish belonged, but you can't let that cloud your judgment.
For sure, I completely agree. But it's sometimes hard not to be biased.
Of course. Of
Well,
course. We live a world of biases, so ultimately...
Witcher 3 is literally the greatest achievement in humanity. Like, I'm not biased at all. Well then,
Through penicillin and all of that good stuff, The Witcher 3 is
yeah,
where
no,
it's at.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we went to the moon, but no. This
Or
one
did
video
we?
game.
Never mattered.
All right, well then, how about we try to come to a definition we can all agree to, or realize where we will definitely never agree.
Yeah.
So let's kind of piece it together one at a time, and we'll go in order. And you say the single most important mechanic that needs to be in an RPG, and then like if like Dan, you go first, and then Louis, he says what you were thinking. Say your next one, and then we'll kind of build to that. So
Easy peasy. Choice. You have to have choice. There has to be an impact that your actions have on not just the story, but ideally the world. And it's a very hard thing to do, but a couple that I could think of, maybe just right off the bat, like Chrono Trigger, right? Although that's a JRPG, and that kind of drifts into a different category entirely. But yes, choice is important.
all right, Julian or Louis, whoever, spit your spiel.
Okay, I mean, if I want to be a dick, I want to say a playable character. Period. But I'll be a little. I'll try.
Really want to go to the nitty gritty here, huh?
I'll be a little bit. According to like a more acceptable definition, I would say an interesting world with deep history and strong lore is something that I think that every RPG deserves. Is what I would say.
Dang.
Okay, in my case, I think I would define an RPG's most important mechanic to build a little bit on what Dan said, but maybe be a little more specific. And have it be some real strong character-defining choices. Not necessarily meaningful in terms of gameplay or ending or world building, but definitely some strong character-building choices. Something that helps you define your character in a broader sense of what it means to be. I was gonna say human, but Mass Effect is a thing, so I'm gonna say alive and thinking. Something that implies a notion of morality and something that can be food for thought, both in and out of game.
So morality.
Yeah,
It's like a
in
morality.
in many senses, yeah, I suppose.
Okay.
Choices that rank on a certain morality scale.
Okay.
All right. Well, you definitely covered a lot of things I would put at the top, but I will say the most significant one we haven't mentioned yet that I think to really define an RPG is like meaningful character progression as far as like mechanics and like leveling up, having stats and skills and abilities and perks and the ability to at least some extent to customize how you build yourself.
Okay, I have a quick question about that.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm gonna be terrible.
No,
again.
no. I want fuck, if someone has the balls, question the choice of one, but I don't think any of us will, because I think we're all in agreement on that. But yeah, please go
Choices
ahead.
are nice.
Okay, so I'll still question the choice one if I have to, because I can. But I'll say for stats, I find really interesting. I was thinking a lot about that before we got on here. I was thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, when I think RPG, I think stats. But the problem with that is that when you think of a game and how a game is designed, there's stats in every game. So when you're thinking of, again, I'll say Call of Duty, okay? You choose which gun you're going to use in your loadout, but the guns have stats. So it starts to become weird because then you're like, well, am I role-playing a character who does the... If we're just purely looking at stats, I mean, and how you build your character, loadouts in Call of Duty technically are stats.
And I mean, your
So-
loadout can say something about the kind of character, and I'm putting huge quotation marks around character here. It
Yeah.
can say a little bit about the kind of character you're playing, because someone who comes in with a big machine gun is definitely a different kind of person than the guy who walks out of there with the silenced pistol and a sniper rifle.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
does that really paint a bigger picture and contribute to what people could call roleplay? I don't think so.
Are you sure? Because if you roleplay as like a stealthy Navy like Marine or something, or no, I don't guess Navy Marine doesn't really make sense. Like
Right.
I guess it would be a stealthy,
It's a bit of a pleonasm.
like a spec ops soldier who's like who's stealthy with snipers and silenced pistols, would be like a secret agent as opposed to the kind of assault.
The more grunt marine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who goes in guns blazing, or an action hero. Those are two different role plays, and like they're different fantasies. So it starts to feel like those are different kinds of characters, even if there's no narrative tied to it. The narrative's in your head, kind of like in more basic games from the past.
Yeah, but again, in this case, like we can go into the specific detail of what it would mean, but I think it needs to be a bit more than just like, okay, which gun you're using. But I do agree that it can definitely show a lot of what a person's like, and technically is role playing to an extent. But I'm thinking, like
Character sheets,
but and just like stat allocation, like Dark Souls. Like you don't have as much choice in the story in Dark Souls, like compared to like Mass Effect and The Witcher. But like you have so much choice in how you build your character, and like so much freedom to just throw the stats where you want to, even though you could very likely do something that's just bad. Games like obviously all the games that are based on old Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like KOTOR, and and that's it's an interesting thing too, because that can talking about Mass Effect, for some people play a role, at least in the shift of whether Mass Effect 2 is as much an RPG or an RPG at all in comparison to Mass Effect 1 and on other like gameplay mechanics. Because I mean, Mass Effect 2 has obviously got it all as far as like choice and character, and its main story fueled by its characters is good, but like the overarching plot's like pretty background in comparison, but it's still got all that. But it way toned back on the options on how to like customize your abilities and your weapons and your companions. So it's one way to look at it, and for some people that would be a difference maker.
Okay, so then by that definition, would we be comfortable calling, let's say, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, since I'm playing it, I'm thinking about it, would that be an RPG?
At the point I'm at in that game, yes.
Yes, okay.
I can call
it's-
Valhalla an RPG.
You can argue maybe not by a lot, but yes, it is.
By the
On a
skin of its
spectrum.
teeth, but definitely it's on
It's an
spectrum. It's on
RPG light,
spectrum.
but like I'd say it's more RPG than like Red Dead Redemption,
Because
it does offer
and
a
I
lot
think
more.
I think the word that Julian coined there is very appropriate. Spectrum.
Yeah,
Some RPGs are more RPG than your RPG. I think that's
Yeah.
a valid idea to bring forth.
Absolutely.
And Valhalla is
Yeah.
definitely on the lower end of the spectrum. Wow, I feel like I'm talking of autism. Sorry. College is catching up.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Look at all these mentally challenged video games.
Well,
I mean, there certainly are quite a few mentally challenged video games out there.
Yeah.
But let's not go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, RPG. I was gonna
I
make a point and it
Spectrums.
ran away. I'm sorry.
Spectrums.
The spectrum is a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, like
really.
the new Assassin's Creed are entry level RPGs, but they give you like a little bit of the whole package. But
Yeah.
none of them are particularly deep, at least compared to their
They
inspirations.
tease at what could be.
Yeah.
So what's if on one side of the spectrum we have RPG with strong stats and traditionalism, the other end would be what action adventure, I guess.
Something like Dark Souls would be very much action adventure RPG, where it's not so much
Well-
about it's not so much about the stats you get as you level up, so much as how they influence your interaction with the environment. Because someone who's riding a big sword, a big shield, a heavy armor won't approach the world the same way someone who's focusing on pure casting would. Like someone who's focusing more on a caster build would have to like it doesn't affect how they interact with the story, and I don't think that makes it a strong argument for Dark Souls being an RPG. But it certainly affects how the character has to approach its environment and the world around him, where like the notion of distance becomes more meaningful than the notion of timing for someone who's focusing on something more like parrying, or on the notion of maintaining stamina for someone who's focusing on blocking. And for God's sake, please don't focus on blocking in the Souls game. That's like the worst mistake you can do. But it mostly, like, the stats mostly change how the player and therefore the character approach the environment, but it has very little to no impact on the story. I mean, some of the recruitable, huge quotation marks here, characters won't talk to you if you don't have a certain bare minimum stat. But beyond that, your stat doesn't really matter.
What about the Firekeeper? And like, aren't there a few people who could die based on your decisions?
Yeah, there's
Yeah, definitely.
Almost all the companions' outcomes is based off your level of interaction with them.
Mm-hmm.
And in most of all of them, I think there's at least a couple endings.
I mean, spoiler alert, in Dark Souls 1, there's a guy you can free who's going to kill one of the Firekeepers if you let him running long enough.
Yeah.
He's pleading for help, like, oh, help me, I was trapped here. And then you free him and he acts all nice, all sweet. And then he goes back to Firelink Shrine and you're like, oh, cool, a new friend.
Yeah.
And then you come back at some point, the fire's out, there's a black eye soul stone and a Firekeeper's soul. And the guy's gone, and you're like, this son of a bitch.
Yeah.
So does that count as meaningful decisions? Like, where are we gonna?
I would
align
say
on
so.
that?
I would say it's one of those fringe cases of just meaningful enough to make it RPG. I mean, given at the time of making that decision, you're not aware of what's gonna happen. It certainly wakes the player up to the idea that what he's doing can have meaningful choice. And I know you don't want me to go too deep into that game because some players have yet to finish it, but Bloodborne plays on the same concept a lot. And to great effect.
Mm.
In the first area, this is something I imagine if you've played even a little bit, you'll encounter. But in the first area of the game, you'll run into a lot of people that are kind of crying for help. And you can make a choice of sending them different places when you discover those places. And that choice really changes the outcome for those characters. Not that you know at the time of making that decision, but on the long run it does. So on the first playthrough, it's not as much RPG as it would be on subsequent playthrough, where as an informed player, you know whether or not you're basically pushing a character to his doom, or if you're just actually providing help to someone.
I'd argue that lack of knowledge is what makes it even more of an RPG
because
the first time.
The reality of life
Yeah.
is that you rarely ever know what the outcome of your choices is going to be.
Makes them more intense. Like in Mass Effect, also, there's definitely a lot of choices where you're like, I hope this doesn't bite me in the ass later.
Yeah. Hope no one dies here.
Yeah, you make a choice, you're like, this kills a character, I swear to God. Garrus, you better be safe, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Who calibrate the ship?
I have a question. Sorry, it's not more. It's more of just a stupid, controversial thing I'm about to say. I know.
Keep the theme going. Roll it out.
I know the answer that you're gonna all have for this. But we're talking about stats for a second. Can we consider a game like Forza Horizon an RPG? It doesn't have a playable character, but your cars have tons of stats, and what cars you keep and drive could determine what kind of character you are.
No.
I mean, if you want to go into the like super psychology element of it, then maybe in your head canon, but not really.
Okay, so but why are the stats different in a game like Forza than, let's say, a game like Dark Souls?
That's a good question.
Is it combat?
Partially, I guess. I don't play enough racing games to really have a feel for a comparison, but I would also say this, like, it's not stats alone don't make an RPG, but I would argue that every great RPG has a strong statistical based combat system or progression system.
Yeah, because ultimately the stat system is a nice way to represent some of the outcomes of those choices.
Yeah. And yeah, like, again, and you could even say the choice argument. Again, okay, you have the choice of which car you want to race in a racing game. I mean, 'cause that's-
Ultimately, I feel like those stats for, especially when a game like a car game, it's more about making sure you're picking the right tool for the job than about defining your driver as a character.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's about character.
yeah.
Right.
And I think I'd also
Yeah, role play. You're not
Yeah.
unless you're playing like a Cars RP where your character is a car.
Autobot roll
Stats
out.
on a car doesn't,
Yeah.
or a transformer,
right.
and stats on a car doesn't make an RPG.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean in Forza, for example, I don't really believe Forza is an RPG, but I think that it's an interesting thought experiment just because in Forza you actually do have your character, you're a person in Forza, like you have an actual
Yeah,
body.
you run like social media and stuff
Yeah, you
beyond the
make your-
races.
Exactly, and you have like a face that you make yourself. You actually have your person. They say your name. Like when I go on, they're like, "Hi, Julian," and I'm like, "Oh my god, that's
Oh,
weird."
Jeez,
Yeah.
breaking the fourth wall. much?
Uncanny Valley.
It's weird when they say because there's like a list of names and they add mine. But the thing is, your character makes decisions based off the festival and stuff. And even though this isn't the kind of fantasy I typically associate with an RPG, there's elements of decision making that impact the. It's hard to say, but it technically impacts the world of Forza
Oh,
Horizon. So it starts to become like it starts to strain the definition in some ways. Because your character does do things for the festival, and like it's not the game. It's probably the furthest game I would think of when I think of an RPG. But in some ways, the car and the way you can upgrade it and tune it starts to reflect your personality as a real person, and you start to customize things to be the way you like, kind of like you customize your character in an RPG. So it starts to just muddy the definition.
I think you're opening an interesting door for me though, because a lot of these games that we don't traditionally associate with the RPG genre have very rich lives on Twitch, with Twitch streamers actually RPing in those games.
For real?
Yeah. Oh yeah. GTA is huge
Oh
on
yeah.
the RP community.
Yeah, for sure.
Huge.
Oh, this is foreign for me. That's cool.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. If you want to look up some cool RPG Twitch streamers, Nicotine, Classy Pax, Classy Katie, there's a bunch really. Like there's a ton of people that dive so deep into RPing in games that aren't necessarily RPGs, but they kind of make it into an RPG of their own. Where one of the guys that just mentioned, Classy Pax, used to play this character that was like a doctor in GTA, and it was this silly, like he's like absolutely, oh my god, it's just hilarious. But it gives a deeper meaning because the RPG is no longer in the game; it's outside of it. So ultimately, like the notion that there's a bit of a headcanon as to what is, I don't want to call it headcanon as to what is RPG, but a bit of a headcanon to be made in some of these RPGs, or some of these games at least. There's ways to make of games that aren't RPGs. But it often involves taking some of the notions out of the game. Like the story of the character. Like when you're playing GTA Online, you're playing basically a blank character, a blank sheet character.
Yeah.
So when you come down and start saying like, okay, well, I want this character to be a shady mechanic that's got all these beat down cars, and well, then yeah, you can make of something that was more meant to be a blank statement and turn it into an RPG. What was that? Sure.
Insert elevator music here.
Dun, 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 dun. Elevator music cue.
Right.
That's definitely something I need to keep on my sampler bar for later use.
Yeah,
Just
definitely.
random
Absolutely.
elevator music. Ow. Would that giant please stop throwing shit at me? Sure.
You got it.
Hey,
You can keep talking. I don't mind, but I'll be right back.
my stream has an actual viewer.
Ooh. Oh shit. So it begins. Yeah, I stand by my statement that I think The Witcher is like equivalent with Red Dead. in terms of RPGs. It's a character you're playing. You make choices.
Because ultimately, stats can't be your breaking point because cars
No.
in real life has stats,
mhm.
and they're not people. They don't live lives. They don't play roles.
What about sports like sports team simulators? You know, like Football Manager 2016 or
Those
something.
are simulator
That's-
games.
Yeah, that's true. I
But
guess
is it-
that's the difference, right? Simulation versus role play.
Yeah, simulation usually involves a broader element of control over elements of gameplay, whether they be bigger rosters of character that you're managing kind of from the outside. Something like what was the name of that game? Like Dungeon Delver.
Oh, a dungeon, dungeon master,
Dungeon,
or what was it?
There was Dungeon where you were just building dungeons, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. There's a game I'm thinking where the whole point of the game is that you recruit adventurers. Well, Darkest Dungeon is a good example of this. Darkest Dungeon is not an RPG. All of your characters have stats, but none of these characters have stories.
Exactly, except for what you make up in your head, Ganon.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I have another question then, because you guys seem to have like you have boundaries that you're making here. So I'm curious, what is without a doubt, instead of trying to define what is an RPG, I want to know what is absolutely not an RPG.
Puzzle games.
Puzzle games.
And I'm being very broad because no, I know of puzzle games with strong RPG elements.
I mean, Catherine, right?
Yeah, that's
puzzle game,
basically the
basically.
only one.
Mm.
That's my only RPG. The only RPG I need. Non, c'est pas vrai. Mais man, it's a tough game because ultimately I think the idea of RPG, maybe the problem with RPG is that we're trying to define too many things at once with it.
Maybe.
And we end up trying to define elements of gameplay and story building and world building all in one term. And we ultimately always end up with either a definition that's going to be overly restrictive or overly lax. Because again, it has to fit so many elements that what is an RPG? Well, it's a game. Okay. So what is definitely not an RPG? Tetris is definitely not an RPG.
Yeah, but why?
Too much abstraction. Basically,
what-
the
what's
more layers of abstraction there is between you and your definition, the harder it is to have a valid definition.
So would you say then Tetris? Oh wait,
I'm
well,
back.
here's Jacob.
Hello.
So Tetris is absolutely not an RPG because it doesn't have a world, a playable character, and the entire concept is abstract. So it's on like the one end of puzzle, abstract, no character, no world. We can definitely say with certainty Tetris is not an RPG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would be next in that line? Like, what's a bit further from Tetris, but is still absolutely not an RPG?
Rocket League.
Arcade
Okay.
games, I
Sport
suppose.
games.
Games that
Sport-
have sports games are another good one.
But why?
Well, I'd say sports games are at least as statistical, if not more so, than the racing games.
Yeah, but
So-
the stats don't help define your character's approach to the world and his interactions with it. It doesn't modulate it modulate which one of the guys is going to be the receiver, sure.
Yeah, well,
But it
also
doesn't
it does
modulate-
change how likely you are to catch the ball, which throws you can
But
make.
how does catching or not catching that ball define your hero as a person?
Well, it defines whether or not they get the
He's
touchdown and
either
win
a
the game and win the
successful,
Super
he's either
Bowl.
a success or a failure, but that
Yeah.
doesn't bring him anything in terms of like character building. Like a professional sports player will have caught and dropped so many balls that another completed or incompleted pass doesn't change who he is on a fundamental level.
Well, not
doesn't
every
help him
day, but
grow
in
as a person.
certain moments, in certain games, absolutely.
Oh, sure. There's always going to be some of those clutch moments for sure, but because those moments are more the exception than the norm, can we really use that as the basis on which we build our definition?
But
Well,
what
I mean,
about-
even in a basic RPG, it's not like every moment's a world-defining moment. You're gonna spend time just chasing chickens. How's that any more meaningful than catching a 5-yard pass?
Sorry,
you know?
if I could just add some fuel to this fire here for a second.
Please do.
Please do.
FIFA doesn't FIFA have a no? Maybe FIFA's
Be a
not the example
pro
I wanted.
mode.
Yeah, it's got like a
I-
manager mode or something.
That's
right?
not even it's not even the one I wanted. I think I forget which sports game, but there's one where there's like pre-written campaigns, but there's ones where you make your own hero, like you make your own character, and there's like you have to pay contracts and you have to like work your way to the top and like be a failure, become a success, like a choose your own adventure sports.
Yeah, I mean,
hero
a lot of modern sports game have this be a pro kind of mode where you start off and play a couple games and you get drafted and then you can ask for trades and like depending on how well you play, you'll wind up on a different line. But all of the character development that comes from those clutch goals and those neat passes and those last second whistle beater and buzzer beaters, they're in your head canon. They're not addressed in the game proper.
Well, what do you mean by addressed in the game proper?
A lot of like, let's take the example in Mass Effect again. If you're faced with a difficult choice to make, something that could shape both your character as to who he is and the universe, you'll usually get feedback from the people in your crew. Like if you're trying to save the Rachni Queen and you have a Krogan with you, he's gonna call you mad. He's gonna say this is insane. You should kill it right now. He's helping. He's contributing to your decision by painting a picture in universe of the implications of your choice, both before and after the fact. It doesn't have to be addressed in the ending as to some like, oh look, there's a kudos to the Rachnis I saved because the Rachnis are fighting on this planet. I don't care about this. What I care about in the context of is a clutch pass the same thing as making a choice in a game like Mass Effect, then I have to think, how does the game present me that choice? And in the context of a sports game, the importance of what just happened is completely artificial in the sports game. That tension was purely on you because you were the one who was aware of where the timer was. You were the one who had to make the work of thinking, that was a clutch decision. That was a clutch moment. That was a clutch play. The game, like, sure, the commentators that are like roboting over what's happening might make a comment about, oh my God, look at the time, whatever. But it has no meaning. Like once the game is done, the game stays the same after.
I mean,
It won't affect any affinity stat with the rest of your team. It won't affect.
I mean, that's
like-
not. I mean, there's actually a lot of other ways the game reacts. If you're doing a franchise mode or be a pro mode,
Yeah, I
there's
guess
a
sports
Twitter
is a
feed
game
with a
style
bunch
that
of
I've been away from for a long time. So my
Well-
views on it might be a little dated.
I play a lot of Madden, and here I'll tell you all the things it does, and then you can tell me if it alters your opinion on it. But one, like you have the commentators in game, and they're bad, but they will say, "Oh, look, that's a last second touchdown." You know, your stats increase based off how well you perform, and there are certain goals going into every game, like score X amount of touchdowns or do this. In between games, you will get messages from other players and coaches directed at whatever person you're controlling, whether it's the player or you're a coach yourself. You'll get trade offers. There's a whole AI system. The rest of the league still exists, and those games get played and have a direct impact on your standings, like in sports. And you can choose to trade people, release people.
I think you draw an interesting case here because I think what you're doing is you're painting a neat picture of a simulation game with RPG elements.
Yeah,
Actually,
no,
you
no,
might
it's 100%,
actually just
yeah.
have a case that these sports simulation have gone quite a long way into incorporating elements of RPG, and
Yeah, especially the
and
be a pro
yeah,
modes
you
because
have a solid case on that one.
you customize your look. At least in some of the Maddens, you pick which
Yeah.
college you went to.
I could never make the players short enough to feel like they were me, though.
Yeah, because if they were short like you, they wouldn't be in the pros. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a sport where a
I'm short. Me and Dan
210-pound
are
player can
short
succeed
by
and-
sports athlete standards,
Yeah,
so don't feel
exactly.
bad.
I mean, by some sports standards, you guys would be too big, though. Like someone like Messi in soccer, he doesn't need to be big. If you kick a soccer
No, but
player
you
into
can still
shit,
be
his
a
whole
big
body
soccer
fractures.
player.
But
I mean, there's definitely, but I mean, like the short quarterbacks are as tall as me and Dan.
oh, for sure,
Yeah,
at least,
yeah,
at
basically.
least.
Sitting at a solid 6'2".
Man, you're a short guy,
Yeah.
almost a full feet talling over me, but
Teensy
you're a short
boy.
guy. I have a quick problem to assess, real quick, so I'll mute myself and be right back.
Dun,
Sure.
dun, dun. Okay.
So-
I never heard.
So what we've determined so far is that everything is an RPG.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's my
Pretty
job. My
much.
job is for that to be the conclusion. Is that it's like because at first in my head I'm like, well, I know because I think when you're defining a definition, you have to start like, well, what can we exclude because it's such a broad topic. It's like what's a
Yeah.
game, for example. What's a game becomes an impossible task sometimes. So if we just start to exclude like, well, I know that Tetris isn't an RPG, fine. But then like I was like, well, racing games, but I'm like, but racing games can be like an RPG, and so can sports games.
Yeah.
So it becomes really tough because when I think role play, I think that it part of it is in your head, right? It's like
Yeah. I mean, like for Skyrim, for example.
Oh yeah.
So much of it is in my
Yeah,
head
yeah,
because
yeah.
so much of it is what was my character before the game starts, you know, and like
Yeah.
I'm just kind of putting that together in the game, and that's, you know, the bulk of my role playing, and yeah, it's almost all in your head, and I think that's kind of like one of the, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's kind of it's a good RPG is the kind of game like Skyrim that provides you with a playground to do that in. You know, and that's where like blank slate characters come in with a pro over predetermined characters, because I mean, and you can say this even about KOTOR, but like KOTOR and Witcher, you can't really headcanon your past, especially once you've, you know, played enough KOTOR.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, whereas Skyrim, you can, even though you're the Dragonborn, like that's such a vague thing in
yeah,
the big
it's very
picture,
vague.
and it's not something from beforehand. And if you get a mod, you can just ignore the whole becoming a Dragonborn thing if you really want
Yeah,
to. Start off somewhere else, you know. And you know, I think
you have to wake up on that wagon. It's not Skyrim unless you're waking up on that wagon being a
Yeah.
that's something a console peasant would say.
rat.
I haven't woken up on that wagon in like 7 years.
It's such a core experience. Hey, you're finally awake.
Yeah.
But you know what? I
Yeah.
think the one thing that really got me the most is talking to Louis about it. Is that Louis prioritizes the choices over the stats? Because for me, it seemed that makes sense in my head. But when I started saying it out loud, it's like Final Fantasy X, JRPGs, Dragon Quest, Persona. I'm like, those without a doubt in my mind are RPGs, but they're lacking a lot of what we were just talking about. It starts to become such a. I've definitely watched YouTubers discuss this before, and it's so messy. An RPG is like a. It's almost like whatever you want it to be. It's so fluid and difficult to pin down.
Yeah.
That's why I prefer the subgenres, because I feel like RPG is dead. Like the term RPG doesn't even make sense to me anymore.
Mhm.
But I love them. Well, then again, I
Yeah.
love video games, so it's kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, at the end of the day, a video game isn't less because it's not a full-fledged RPG.
Mhm.
But again, you know, what isn't kind of depends on what you look for. But I still think there are certain like there's no set definition to do it. But you kind of have to look at like video games by their very nature kind of embody so much of what you will think of off the top of your head as a role-playing game. You know, like they like it's not just the Baldur's Gate games that embrace D&D's roots. It's the entire industry.
So as much as D&D was probably one of the first cases of real RPG, most of us here, or certainly all of us here, our first exposure to RPGs was definitely through video games.
Yeah, and most likely through a video game, or at least for a lot of people, through a video game that was directly or indirectly inspired by D&D. Like Knights of the Old Republic is a, you know, rework of the second edition D&D. You know, like it owes as much to D&D as Baldur's Gate itself. You know, like
Even old schoolers like me, Final Fantasy 1 was hugely inspired by D&D mechanics.
yeah. And so
May I just read a definition of RPG for you guys?
Please do.
To see how
Please
this
do.
goes?
please.
Okay, so this is just Wikipedia, so
That's fine.
take it with a grain of salt. A
Is there a
role-playing game.
source cited?
Yeah, there is actually.
Then it's not a bad definition necessarily.
Cool. So, a role-playing game, often abbreviated as RPG, is a game in which players assume the roles of characters in a fictional setting. Players take responsibility for acting out these roles within a narrative, either through literal acting or through a process of structured decision-making regarding character development. Actions taken within many games succeed or fail according to a formal system of rules and guidelines. So there's more to it, and this is mostly like the pictures and stuff indicate tabletop,
Mhm.
but there's nothing here to say otherwise. There's a subcategory for the definition that says role playing video games, which says that it's a video game genre where the player controls the action of a character and or several party members immersed in some well-defined world, usually involving some form of character development by way of recording statistics. So again, it's a little broad, but we start to see some defining traits here. That we have
Yeah.
the actions of a character or several party members, and a well-defined world, and some form of character development in the way of recording statistics.
Yeah, I
But-
feel like that actually kind of hits on a lot of the main things we said
Yeah.
when we first went around. You know, like the statistic, like we said, the stats. We said, choices and
Choices.
stuff. So
Statistics.
even though it may not encompass, the base definition of RPG, there's still like a refined definition for the video game version, I guess. And that, like I said, it differentiates between it and a tabletop there itself, right? So.
Yeah, because by default, a video game RPG has very obvious limitations that tabletop wouldn't have.
Yeah.
For being RDM for many years, I'm sure you can tell us about how your faculty to improvise off of the stupid choices we make is improved, whereas a game's capacity to improvise based on the stupid choices you make is very limited, if at all present.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that would also be like again, I don't know how much would be enough, but that kind of interactivity to some extent is necessary, I think, in RPGs as well. I think that's why, Divinity Original Sin 2 is so well regarded. It's because it takes that idea, among others, and just pushes it to the max, at least for a more structured narrative game. And that's why Elder Scrolls and Fallout are so loved too, because they, more so than most games, can accommodate your shenanigans.
Yeah. The whole notion of sandbox, I think,
Yeah.
is becoming very fundamental to what is and isn't a good RPG.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm just looking at the definition and saying trying to find ways to ruin it. But
At least you're upfront about it.
You've
Yeah.
just become my kind of scholar.
well, yeah, that's pretty much what university was like. But
Yeah.
so we see well-defined world, for example. So that's something that I even mentioned when I was
The
saying
lore and
what I
everything.
want.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, well-defined world. Yeah, I'm thinking at first, Mordor or somewhere, anywhere like a fictional location. But there's really nothing stopping Earth from being a
The
well-defined
real world is a well-defined world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the player controls the actions of a character, usually involving some form of character development by way of recording statistics. Again, it seems impossibly broad. Like if it could include Earth, and you play as a character again, that was like the most basic thing we could establish. It starts to feel kind of like too open-ended again, where pretty much anything again could really fall into that category. You play as a character in a well-defined world, and there's usually statistics and character development.
Well, I think maybe more by a well-defined world. You don't get that just by default setting it on some bum's apartment on Earth, Like, it's a well-defined world if it really leans into the world's lore and stuff, Like you could take two games in the same series, let's say, like a franchise, let's say like Mass Effect, and you have like one that really just like Mass Effect does, and just explodes you with lore all over the place, and then there's another game where it's just like set in like one location and it's completely cut off from the world. Like, yeah, it's set in the well-established universe, but it's not taking advantage of it, so it doesn't count. That's how I'd see it.
Basically, I think what they mean also as well-defined world is presence of a codex, maybe? Does presence of a codex alone is enough to provide a well-defined
Or-
world?
Maybe not like a codex specifically, but at least I think what it means is there needs to be lore. Whether it's organized for you in a codex or just put on item descriptions, I don't think matters as long as it's there.
The past, like a well-defined past, and
There's
present.
a way to build like a reverse engineered version of what the story of this world is. Because Dark Souls has lore. It doesn't put it in your face, but it has it.
Yeah.
It's up to you to engage with it or not by reading the descriptions and trying to piece the puzzle together. But the lore is there.
Yeah, I'd say as long as the lore is there and can be accessed in some capacity, that's all you need.
So new God of War remake, PS4. That's still an RPG according to these rules.
I don't know.
I don't know that God of War ever was an RPG.
It definitely wasn't before.
Skill trees
And I don't
for
think
me
it is
aren't
now.
enough to make RPG.
No, because that's just an action game.
When they say stats, like defined in a pile of statistics, if those statistics don't represent who your character is, but are simply just a
DPS.
short list of his abilities, then it's not RPG just because skill tree.
So it has to define the character's
Those stats,
personality.
At the
usually
very base,
defined
at
as-
least,
yeah.
like between like you can break it down. Okay, are you a warrior, a mage, or a thief? At the very least, you need that kind of decision
Class
making.
building?
Whereas like with God of War, like you are a defined
You're a warrior.
warrior, like. And I'd say
You're a warrior that wars and wargs. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it.
and like
I
even The
think
Witcher,
we're
you
getting
can
somewhere here.
yeah, like even in The Witcher, you could argue it's not as strong in that regard, but it does have some variety at least within being a Witcher. But it more leans in on like defining your character through the choices you make and your relationships with your companions and
Because
the
ultimately,
world.
when you look at The Witcher, what it is to be a Witcher is a pretty well-defined thing.
oh yeah, it's
So
definitely
it's
not
not-
like a full like Skyrim where you can do whatever you want.
It's definitely not out of place to say that, like, an RPG doesn't mean you can do anything, but it means you certainly have some leeway into how you do it. And I would argue that Skyrim tried something and it kind of failed in the process, because yes, you can be whatever you want, but I feel like the game comes in with heavy expectations of what you're actually. Like, I'm pretty sure the developers of Skyrim had pretty much intended for the canon character, and I'm putting huge quotation marks around this, to be like this sword and board kind of Norse warrior, Viking warrior.
well,
Because if you look at how the main story and some of the other subplots develop, they don't account very well for the other choices you could have made. It
Well-
comes to mind a specific section when you're in Markarth and you're doing the Forlorn quest line, and then you're put in jail and they're like, we took away all your weapons. But since they did nothing to neutralize your ability to do magics, then it's just, you didn't rob me of any of my weapons, depending on the playthrough you're doing, of course. But they meant to create something big, but in their execution, it might have been a little sloppy. Where I think Oblivion might have been a little better in that regard. But
yeah, but at least from an overall gameplay perspective, it wasn't like it hampered.
no,
I'd
definitely
say
not.
Fallout.
No,
If anything, Fallout 4 was more guilty of that kind of thing, and obviously, like they did. The world is more built for that kind of character because it is Skyrim. Like that's just how it is. It's not like they went to some neutral location and just picked an archetype to be the archetype. Like this is the home of that archetype. So it makes sense that maybe the people there, maybe they're just not expecting people who end up in their prisons to be wild, crazy magic users or such. They're just used to dealing with Vikings basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in many regards, it would make sense in the lore of Skyrim that they wouldn't prepare for magic users because magic is shunned in the Skyrim region. So,
Yeah.
it would make a certain amount of sense for sure.
Yeah, like I know what you're saying, and definitely a lot of games do it, but I don't think Skyrim does it that bad. I'm worried that Bethesda games are getting progressively worse in that regard. but-
I'm worried we're ever gonna see another Bethesda game for a long time, honestly.
Yeah.
After all the lawsuits and all that stuff, I don't know if you heard about the class action lawsuit against Fallout 4.
I don't think so. No.
Long story short, they're being
Bags?
sued over the Creation Club because in the eyes of many lawyers, the Creation Club qualifies as DLC content. And people who bought the season pass didn't have access to the Creation Club content, even though it technically qualifies as DLC content. Long story short.
Yeah.
All of that because when they published Fallout 4, they didn't put a EULA. to say that they were discharging themselves from possible lawsuits and this and that.
But Microsoft's acquisition, is that going to affect that at all?
Well, that lawsuit is putting a hold on the acquisition altogether.
It
I
said
don't-
Europe the Europe division just today officially acquired Bethesda, Microsoft.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
There you go.
So that's just Europe's division.
Fresh
I don't
news.
know if North America is. I don't know if that's affecting anything here.
I would imagine
Honestly,
it would
I'm not
follow
following
suit
it.
soon enough. As soon as the litigations are done, kind of thing.
Yeah, or it's just going on the side. But I think we'll get something eventually. Like I mean, technically, Bethesda or maybe it's technically ZeniMax producing
Yeah.
games like from Arcane, publishing Deathloop.
Yeah.
So that's like their latest game is still coming out, regardless.
To be
Uh,
continued for sure.
Yeah, we'll have a Bethesda cast one day.
Yeah, we're
Is the-
definitely gonna need to.
Is Dishonored?
2022.
Is Dishonored an RPG?
Yeah,
I guess by the
Barely.
definition of even giving,
barely, but it is.
technically.
It's an RPG in the definition that you get to pick one of two ways of being Corvo, and I don't remember who you play in the second one.
It's Corvo or Emily in the second one, so you get to
Okay,
choose.
well, the way I see it, you either go at it the violent route or the pacifist route, I guess I can put it. The friend of the people or the enemy of the people kind of choice. And it is very meaningful in terms of character development. It's a singular choice, but it's a very heavy choice because one puts him as this dutiful person that's standing for what he believes is right, and the other one is just a bloodthirsty savage that's thirsty for revenge. I mean, I might be painting it in a bit of an extreme term, but it's basically what it boils down to. You either make the conscious choice of killing whoever's in your path or of avoiding / neutralizing the people who are in your path.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yep.
it's spectrum. It's definitely spectrum.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think it is.
Okay, here's a question for people. What is everyone's like? What makes you sick when you hear this game being called an RPG?
Cyberpunk.
Fallout 4.
You guys,
Shots fired.
literally because they're shooters. But,
Yeah.
but
The only RP that's happening in Cyberpunk is VRPing as Johnny Silverhand.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
Yeah, at least narratively, I completely agree on Cyberpunk. I think Cyberpunk does at least a decent job of letting you customize how you play, but yeah, yeah.
I still would say both are
yeah.
RPGs, but that's just.
But
Yeah, no, I
CD
was
Projekt
shooting
Red
at the low-hanging
themselves
fruit
doesn't
here.
even refer to it as an RPG in their Twitter bio. Like this was like a year and a half ago. It said, here comes the next RPG from the dark future, blah 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 blah. And then it's just like one day they're just like, let's just take out RPG and put action adventure.
I guess
It
they knew what they
definitely-
had at some point.
It definitely leans closer to. Both Fallout 4 and Cyberpunk both clearly lean heavily into action, and they kind of minimize the RPG elements as opposed to games like Divinity or games that are clearly inspired like Pillars of Eternity.
Yeah,
But I still think that they have enough of a base there. They betray. I think the reason you guys feel sick when you hear it is because they openly betray a lot of the elements that make RPGs. But I think at the bottom line, they serve enough RPG elements to be called it. But I still think that technically it checks out.
I guess it's my turn for the hot take. I actually enjoyed Fallout 4 quite a bit.
I'm not saying it's a bad game.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a trash RPG.
And I can agree that it's a very minimalist RPG because the meaningful choice your character makes basically boils down to which side are you on. And that's pretty much it, because the rest, even the voiced lines, even after all the complaints that people have had as to why it's not a good RPG, I think that the real reason it's a bad RPG is because they removed a lot of the interesting, meaningful choices to be replaced by the one choice of who you're siding with in the very end. And it's a bit of a lazy RPG in that regard. But I definitely don't think that made it a bad game, per se.
Oh, I
No,
don't think we're calling.
No.
But
games-
Dan can attest. All the trash talk over the years, I've never said Fallout 4 was bad. I just said it was a terrible RPG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Oh, yeah,
betrayed
it's
what it
not a good
was,
RPG.
like what people had come to expect from this, and that's
Yeah.
kind of an issue with the industry. Is that I feel like game developer studios are almost like once you make something good that people really resonate with, it's like a trap because
they're trying to
suddenly you
catch
can't
that
innovate.
lightning in a bottle again, and you can't.
Yeah,
There's no
but
such
that's
thing.
I don't agree because they're deliberately making changes. They're letting the lightning out. They're doing the exact opposite. I feel like with Fallout 4, they knew what worked. They did it they did it with Morrowind and Oblivion and Skyrim. Then Fallout 3, they saw Obsidian do the same thing with Fallout New Vegas, and then they're just like, no, let's throw that bottle against the wall and try something new. That's
to
why they
be
failed.
to be entirely unfair to Bethesda and fair to Fallout, the best Fallout games were all games that weren't made by Bethesda.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Obsidian for sure MVP.
Like the originals, at least for lore, and then Obsidian's the best, like for what Fallout is supposed
I
to
was
be.
late to the party of playing New Vegas, and
Yeah, it's
boy,
my
did it
favorite one
blew
by
my
far.
fucking mind.
Yeah,
Me
it's an
too, I have to
incredible-
say,
it's-
in many ways.
So,
There's
you know,
elements of Fallout 3 that I enjoyed a lot,
Yeah, me too.
but New Vegas was something else.
I think
It was a whole
I think
different
Fallout
story.
3 gets like that real like, oh, this is just like fucked post-apocalyptic
Yeah,
and like
Fallout 3 was a
survivalist.
bit of a pioneer too, because it was bringing
for
the
sure.
Fallout franchise
Yeah.
into this whole first person rather than the isometric view it was known for before. It brought it to the first person, and it had a lot of work to do because figuring out VATS in a system
Oh yeah,
like that of Skyrim, Morrowind, Oblivion, and all that stuff. Like they had a big job to do, and they did a good job with Fallout 3. New Vegas was better, but
Yeah. Well, New Vegas also had the benefit, like the Obsidian is staffed by a lot of people who worked on the original Fallouts.
yeah, they were more true to the vision
Yeah.
and how
To the-
they
to the lore.
addressed certain ideas. I feel
It
Fallout
seems-
4 put the foot off the gas and stomped on the brake real hard and
Yeah.
tried to paint a world that was. And I mean, there's something to be said about that being a good decision. They were trying to paint the world differently than they did in all of the previous ones, where they were trying to paint a world that was healing and that was in the process of becoming humane again. But I think that removed a lot of the interest of the series and of the RPG because the choices you got to make felt more mundane in comparison.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's a result of them trying to appeal to a broader audience by making the voice
Agreed.
of the protagonist and everything. It's like it seems more like a traditional game to like, for example, Witcher 3 having dialogue decisions, Mass Effect having that dialogue wheel. So Fallout's just joining into that more cinematic, narrative-driven experience that people come to expect from an RPG. So I think that's what they did, but by doing that, they're sacrificing a lot of possibilities because by having a voice protagonist, you're obviously limiting the
Yeah.
things that can happen.
And I just don't get it because it's what a lot of people expect from like certain types of RPGs, but it's not what anybody ever expected from Bethesda. At least I did. Like I play games for the story. I don't play Bethesda games for the story. I play Bethesda games for the RP and my headcanon story. That's why I have like a gajillion centuries in Skyrim, you know? Like
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
yeah, exactly.
it's not because the
Beyond
Dragonborn
just
has such
the
a cool
countless hours
story.
of fucking around with mods.
Yeah, but yeah, it's not just. Oh, it's not. I'm not there for the Dragonborn story. I'm there for the story that's
making my
being told
own.
around that. And then Fallout's like, let's take that thing that no one actually really cares about in our games and make it the focus. And I'll never, for the life of me, understand why. And to think that they
Broad
could have
appeal.
possibly matched with. I mean, it was horrible luck that The Witcher 3 for them came out just a few months beforehand because it's. Jokes, and then even just in comparison to other games that were more further removed from it, like it came out like 3 years after Mass Effect, and it doesn't even come close to emulating what it's clearly trying to emulate in Mass Effect, let alone things that came out that year. And I just don't understand why. Like you had your strengths, why did you
Why did you play
Stop.
against it, basically? Yeah.
like, you know,
Which is
when-
exactly why I mean, well, one of the reasons definitely that I think Fallout 76 failed so much is because they tried to take it in such a different direction. And like, I understand that it's the first time that they were doing like a multiplayer game. You cannot take out the NPCs. That's taking the soul out of the Fallout series, you know?
yeah,
Yeah, the NPCs, especially in Fallout, the NPCs are what you can use to paint the state of the world. Having none of them, Like, sure, you can paint the image of a world that's devastated and that's lonely because people are dead everywhere and live in remote communities of a few hundred people.
Mhm.
But it doesn't drive the point of the atrocities that those limited communities sometimes have to commit just to keep going.
Just to get by.
Like,
yeah.
I remember there's a whole subplot line in Fallout 2 where you figure out that iguana bits on a stick are actually human meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's
that
cool.
if you don't do those side quests, you live on never knowing. But once you do, you start to realize that some people have had to go to fucked up depths just to keep going. And New Vegas does the same thing. And Fallout 3 did similar things, maybe a little more lighthearted, but still, there's still an undetonated nuke in the center of Megaton, and you can, in
Yeah.
your right mind, just choose to blow it up.
Yep.
Yeah, Fallout 3
For
was
a
a
bunch of
great
cats?
great RPG. Like it was different if you like came in with Fallout lore knowledge, but compared to Fallout 4, like it's night and day. Like my first half hour in Fallout 3 is like I grow up, I force my childhood bully to watch his mom get eaten by roaches, then I kill him, and then I go to the first town I see there's a bomb there, and then the dude offers me a lot of money to blow it up, and I do it.
Yeah, of course.
Like what?
Welcome
and
to Fallout.
then Fallout 4, it's like, oh, I have to love my child. Like what?
Yeah.
Like, come
Yeah.
on.
Or New Vegas, when you get into New Vegas for the first time, and then Yes Man gets you to. Look, how about you go and meet the other people, figure out who they are a little bit, and then you figure out White Glove Society is a bunch of cannibals, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, and they all have a chip on their shoulder that's just like they appear tame on the outside, like the NCR, like they're trying to be a new form of democracy, but they're pushing people around like to no end to do so. So are they the good guy? Is Caesar's Legion the bad guys? Like they're doing the same thing, just one of them stands for a more democratic idea, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the different methods, but the same goal of
Ultimately,
trying
But
to.
they still paint a portrait that's not shades of black and white.
Yeah,
Whereas
you know,
Fallout
when-
4 is like these are the good guys, the Institute are the bad guys, and just
yeah.
Brotherhood
like
of Steel is just gray in the middle, and then you go.
yeah, and like in New Vegas, like when you meet Caesar, like the first time, you're like, wow, this dude's not some like
Oh, yeah,
raging
Caesar's
barbarian.
great.
You're like, he's
Yeah.
a
No,
you
he's
know,
a sophisticated
intelligent
guy. Yeah,
yeah, and just all the ways you can play around with that, like
not just a raving maniac.
yeah,
I watched a really cool video about New Vegas and how they approached role playing, specifically with the cannibalism mission. And I want to preface this by saying I have not played a lot of New Vegas, so I actually don't know too much.
Highly
But,
recommended.
I've heard this on no end, and I was really hyped to play it. For some reason, I just didn't. I don't know what ended up happening there, but
mistakes.
basically, yeah, probably. The thing is that there's this one mission, with the cannibals, and he showed the number of ways that you can go into it and the number of outcomes that mission has, and it is mind blowing because you could also be a cannibal yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could be a cannibal and like try and infiltrate them by being a that detail, that level of detail is incredible. Like being able to role play that hard into your cannibalistic character. Like if you want your character to be cannibal, it's not just like a surface detail that you have on your character sheet. It impacts certain quest lines. That to me is a fantastic quality of an RPG, and I don't think many could say they do that. I wanted to see if I could find the video. Almost, I'll probably share it with you guys because I find that it blew my mind when I saw the like list of possibilities. Because there's so many.
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
No, New Vegas it's another one like, right up there with Mass Effect, KOTOR, Witcher. Like New Vegas is one of my favorites. Like just because it's such a good RPG. Yeah, and it still has like open world and so many different ways to approach combat, and yeah, you actually feel different when you're playing it differently. You know.
Once again, a game where your choices fucking matter.
Yeah. And I think it at the end of the day, a good story with where your choices matter, at least for me, is the number one criteria for an RPG.
Which boils down to my opening statement: meaningful choice.
Yeah.
RPG hinges on the notion of meaningful choice.
Yeah. I completely agree with, and like That's why and I know you're like, you know, give endings a break a lot, but to me, like, a bad ending is the worst portrayal of that.
Definitely. I can definitely agree to that though.
Because
Like, don't give me like the one of the problems I had with calling Cyberpunk an RPG was that you make all of those choices, you live the life you've made, but you can do and undo it all at the end just by changing the choice you make.
yeah, yeah. Whereas just, you know, like just a comparison between that and The Witcher 3, like the decisions you make that like there's a key series of decisions that ultimately impact like the main ending, and then there's like everything else that deals with like the world state and all that. But like the core possibility of the three endings, the series of decisions that do that, you have no idea you're making those decisions when you're making them, and it profoundly changes your Geralt's outcome and you know, other characters' outcome.
Yeah, stressful as all hell.
Yeah, like and like I said, you have no idea till the end that those were the decisions that decided everything.
Right.
And there are also some of the decisions, like to go back to what you were saying, Louis, that really can help define Geralt as a person. Because they're like, it's different options of how to approach certain situations that are of a very personal nature, and it can really define who he is as a person, which ultimately defines how the game ends and how his story ends. And yeah, and I think all three Witcher games have actually done really good jobs with their endings and their antagonists. But like New Vegas does a good job with its ending, you know, and like any game that can, you know, stick the landing, like that's super important. For
I think New Vegas is a prime example of how keeping things simple in terms of an ending is maybe something that more developers should do, because New Vegas has you doing this final mission, and then your ending is a slideshow. It's not one of these super sophisticated animation that tries to... No, it's a slideshow that tells you about what happened to the characters you met. And I think that's a better ending than a lot of other endings that I've seen in video games, because it gives, again, meaning to the relationships you built and to the way you dealt with some situations.
Yeah, and I think all the best RPGs have that kind, like a lot of the classic BioWare ones, like Dragon Age and stuff, have like a slideshow at the end. Pillars of Eternity has one. The Witcher 3 has one. That kind of goes over the world state secondary character stuff. But yeah, I agree. I like that as well. Instead of, I mean, I think you need that, and you need like the core moment too. Like that slideshow stuff is usually more about like I said, the secondary stuff, the world state. You know, how did this war end? Who's alive and dead out of these two people? But then you still have that actual in-game ending moment where, like, you know, which, you know, what was more I was referring to with The Witcher, like those series of decisions lead to that moment, or like, you know, in Mass Effect 3, that moment in the Crucible with the child of my nightmares, and you know that's the you know, that's as much part of the ending as a slideshow, and that needs to be as good as well. Because you can say a lot of nice things after the fact, but like you still need to land that final cinematic moment.
Of course, that all of the slideshow at the end is meaningless if you were disappointed moments before.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all meaningless when you realize, at least before Extended Cut, the Mass Effect 3 ending stranded everybody in our solar system, and like half of them can't eat food found in this solar system. So
yeah, it's horrific. It's like I had so many questions.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my god, wait! I'm like, when they said like all technology stopped and the mass relays are turned off, I was thinking, I'm like, whoa, hey, that's a...
The Quarians are doomed by definition because they live in robotic suits. So unless they were orbiting around Rannoch and managed to land without electronics, they're dead.
It just happened. Like
not just that. I'm like, whoa! Everyone's back to the Stone Age. Like, there's gonna be wars.
Maybe not Stone Age.
The Reapers
but
kind of won.
Definitely,
you know, like,
in the long run, the Reapers won. Everybody had to take a step back.
Unless you take Synthesis, I guess Synthesis is better.
It's not a real ending. There's only one real ending.
Yeah.
Destruction?
Darkchild.
Destruction via indoctrination theory.
Indoctrination, they confirmed was wrong, and they said, we wish we could have come
they're
up
never
with
going to admit it. Yeah, of course they're going to say that, because they can't come out now, because everyone's just going to accuse them of stealing it. But
They should have stolen it.
They should have.
should've.
I agree.
They should've.
I agree. 100%.
Embrace it.
When I beat it, I remember seeing that on YouTube and being like, "Oh, that explains so much." I'm like, "That's so much more interesting." God damn! And then a bit later, they're like, "Yeah, no, that's not true." And I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
no, that's just our bad for not being able to tell a better story.
Hey,
But
Sorry.
honestly, I don't believe them when they say they didn't know. There's too many coincidences.
Oh,
Too many
I fully
things.
believe when they say they didn't know. I
I've-
fully
I've
believe.
I've watched hours of video. Like, there's too many things they did in that ending sequence that don't make sense otherwise.
Yeah. I don't put
But,
it
I mean,
past
like,
them to have
not
written
like,
stuff
oh,
that
they
makes
just
no
missed
sense.
something. Like, they're putting things there that are clearly, like, should be taken as hints of something else going on, and they're just like,
maybe it was a plan
I-
at one point and they reversed it or something. And they changed their
But
mind."
I know there's a big deep plot that they didn't explore with the dark energy plot.
yeah.
Where they kind of brush on it in the second one and then never return to it. But in my opinion, that whole indoctrination theory, it's writing parallel to something like the Zelda timeline, the canon Zelda timeline. There is none. That's something that fans just made up by finding details of what could we use to help build a timeline, other than the fact that there's these recurring elements like the Triforce, the Master Sword, the Hero of Time, and all of these elements. And I really wouldn't put it past the developers of Mass Effect 3 to have just made a blunder that pointed finger at an indoctrination theory that wasn't a thing. Just on behalf of poor storytelling and poor writing.
yeah.
I mean, ultimately, the problem was taking the lead writer off of it. That's,
Yeah. It's
that's
never a
really
good
what it came down
strat.
to.
I mean,
Mass Effect 1 and 2 were great.
companies,
3 was
companies
fun.
are what they are, man.
But it's
They'll deal with employees the way they feel is necessary. It's the unfortunate things of the corporate world, unfortunately.
hmm.
Well, yeah, let's move on from Mass Effect, because that will be its own podcast one day.
Oh,
Yeah.
it could be. Very well could be.
All right, does anyone have anything they have on their minds they want to bring up right now? Or are we kind of...
What would be your perfect RPG? Like, what would it look like? How does it begin? How does the middle happen? How does it end? You can remain in as broad a terms as you like. But, like,
Yeah.
how would you pitch a game that would be your perfect RPG?
I'll this a quick answer, because it's the first thing that comes to my head. The closest
Witcher
thing I've
4.
yeah, but not
Half-Life
even, I'm not even saying The Witcher. I'm not even saying The Witcher. I think for like, you know, all those aspects. So I'll admit The Witcher is weak in regards to like the character progression as far as like diversity, right? So if I were saying my perfect RPG, I would take, you know, all the great things The Witcher does and want something like that. And I think the game that's come the closest to like having itself on a high level across all those facets, while also mixing like deep combat with cinematic storytelling, is Dragon Age Origins.
Ooh.
Good
That
choice.
is my
Good choice.
template for the perfect RPG. You
Okay.
can like adjust things, like if you want like a more like change what the story is, like as far as like being more like in line with your taste or whatever. But like for me, the perfect RPG would be a modern day Dragon Age Origins with maybe a bit more of a mature story as opposed to like. But even then, I love the cliched stories. So yeah, Dragon Age Origins is my model for a perfect RPG.
Okay.
It's just across the board. Yeah. But if I could pick and choose, like from different games, I say, okay, Witcher storytelling, Skyrim's or Elder Scrolls character progression. You know, I could pull a bunch of things. But if well, broadly speaking, yeah, like Dragon Age Origins is the ideal RPG.
If I were to be all powerful and I could dictate whatever game I want to be made, I think from purely well, actually no, not just purely gameplay and narrative. So basically, just to make the perfect RPG, I think I would want to have the character creation and diversity of a game like Divinity, where you can have so many different personalities as your protagonist. So fully voiced, multiple dialogue options, and a lot of creative ways to approach situations. And then I would throw in, and I know this is maybe a bit controversial, I prefer a bit more of an action approach. I would probably prefer combat closer to something like in Dark Souls than in something like Pillars of Eternity or Divinity itself.
Like a nice, active, tight combat system.
Yeah, so something like where I'm direct, like it's very skill based, but there still are stats. There still are a wide variety of builds. It doesn't need to be as punishing as Dark Souls necessarily, but it needs to be like very responsive, tight controls, good action, but also tons of different builds, tons of different quest lines, surprising story elements, strong world with tons of lore to explore, and something that maybe feels a little original. Like throw in a setting that maybe isn't used quite as much.
Okay. If you had to just throw a setting out, steampunk or Cyberpunk
not even
until recently, right?
I think there's always two settings that I feel are woefully underused. Two of my favorite settings in a game. One is one that I think it's been called the new weird. So something like Control, where you have like fantasy elements and like almost horror, like SCP, but in the modern day.
Okay.
And the second one being fantasy sci-fi. So trying to think
Star
of a really good
Wars.
example.
Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars, but I would say less heavy on the sci-fi, heavier on the fantasy. So something more like Elex, if you guys know the game Elex.
Yeah. I know.
Or in the case of Star Wars, like original trilogy Star Wars.
But even then, I find that like having spaceships and some of the cities are it's a bit too advanced technologically. Like I would wind that down a little. Not
Advanced
too
isn't
much.
what makes sci-fi though.
When I say sci-fi, though, I mean when I'm thinking of Star Wars, I think that's just too advanced. It could still be sci-fi, but I'm just saying I would like in my head universe. I'm imagining here. Like, yeah, you could have a world like they don't necessarily have to have been off planet. Is technically what I'm implying.
Okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
something
Technology for that.
futuristic, but not necessarily like open galactic wars levels of futuristic.
So like
Exactly.
Half-Life.
Yes, like
Okay.
Half-Life.
Okay.
Maybe a bit more like
Interesting.
swords and shields.
Yeah,
like,
but
still
I think
laser
yeah.
swords, maybe like lightsabers, whatever stuff like that.
There's a
Energy
galactic
blades.
community there, but you ain't a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So yeah, that's my those are my worlds
Interesting.
and stuff.
yeah, that's a good.
I would
different
probably
take.
go. I've had all this time to think, and I wish I had a clearer picture, but I was so enthused by what you guys were saying. I would probably go for something. I like my high fantasy. Like fantasy in general is my favorite setting. The more magic, the better. So for me, it would definitely be something like an Oblivion Skyrim-esque experience, but all of its core systems would have to be much richer. Like casting magic isn't necessarily just you equip your fireball spell and then you just whiz away until you have no more mana. Your sword and shield builds isn't just you hit away left and right until you have no stamina or until your enemy's dead, whichever comes first. It's definitely a world where there's a lot of NPCs to be interacted with and a lot of choices of answers that you can't go back on just by, oh wait, I'm just gonna go talk to him again and give him a different answer to get a different experience what this guy could be saying. So ultimately, we got pretty close with some of the past games that we've had, but just something a little more elaborate. Something that doesn't try to cater to a broad audience, but that likes to go into the nutty gritty of how does it work in this world to be casting magic or to be hunting deer or to be living the life of this character or that character. How does being the Archmage of the Wizards Guild make you a different person in that universe? What kind of privileges did that give you? In a lot of those Oblivion, Skyrims, and all of that, it's usually access to a room that has some benefits to it, but it doesn't change much.
No.
Like in Skyrim's example, like you can start the campaign, just blow the main quest and go do whatever you want, and then by the time the main quest circles back to what you're doing, you're Archmage of the Mage Guild, leader of the Companions, you're all this neat stuff, but everybody still talks to you, you're this nobody prisoner.
Fucking Nazim will never like
Oh
acknowledge
my
you.
Oh, he'll
God.
never respect
Like
you.
you
Don't say
piece
that
of
name here.
shit.
Don't say his
It's like I
name.
run
Yeah,
the
right.
Cloud District. Yeah.
Oh god.
So
No, yeah,
maybe a
you're-
game that shows a little more self-awareness. I hate to call it that because like it's not AI here, but
Right.
Yeah.
like maybe the games of the future will have some elements of AI that
Well-
reflect upon you as a player, but it's not there now, and I don't
Yeah.
think I'm gonna see it of my living.
And there's been
As
older
much as I
games that
hope
have
I
done
do.
it better already. Like just the previous Elder Scrolls games had
Yeah.
more of that. Like especially like Morrowind, but even Oblivion too. Like,
Oh man, if you want to
Oh.
have fun one afternoon, go online and play. What was the name of that game? AI Dungeon, where it's like
yeah.
the game shoots you like a basic setting. Like you can input a few things, and then the game is gonna shoot you this like basic setting, and then you can type in either a response in character or a story moment, like you enter a door to find the castle raided by whatever, and then the game is gonna try to complete your statement and build on it.
Oh yeah.
So there's a
I've heard of
nice
this.
back and forth between you and this AI that's trying to learn about what you're doing. And this AI, like after some time, is gonna try to get things to resolve. And when it does, it sometimes does extremely dramatically by just having people die and things explode randomly.
Yeah. It gets pretty ridiculous.
And it's definitely a silly afternoon of fun to be had. I don't know that there's much more about that game than maybe an afternoon or two of just fucking around. But definitely a nice concept to be toyed with. But yeah, perfect RPG, high fantasy. Just because of what high fantasy allows. But I mean, I guess sci-fi opens just about as many doors as to what's possible. Because what's possible through magic could very well be possible through misunderstood science.
yeah.
So ultimately, it's just I would like to see video games expand on their systems. I just found out about this game Outward that
Oh,
has
yeah.
a really neat, interesting idea about how magic operates, where basic magic is in itself kind of weak and kind of costly, but there's things you can do like drawing ritual circles around you and whatever to make it stronger. So the life of a caster really becomes this battle of how do I set myself up? Kind of like the same thing a sniper would think of, where am I going to position myself to get the good wind and the good position and the good view? Well, the wizard has to think, okay, where am I going to be? Where am I putting my circle, my protective circles? And like, what's my strategy here? Something that forces me to think a little more, both in terms of mechanical gameplay and of RP gameplay. Like asking difficult questions of like, yeah, okay, we can deviate the flow of that river to help that town farm goods, but deviating the flow of the river might hinder another community further down the line. So if for whatever reason you hate the other community or you haven't interacted with them or you're not aware of it, well, it's going to look like a no-brainer choice that later down the line you realize like, whoops, I might have fucked up there. I find a lot of games, they offer a choice that doesn't feel as meaningful as it could have been, because they're afraid of making everything look like whatever you did, it was damned if you do, damned if you don't. But my experience of life in general is that a lot of choices are going to be like that, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. I think it's more games are just afraid to let you fail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
definitely.
definitely a huge case of that. Definitely.
And that's a shame because failure is like
Failure is a part of life, dude.
It's a fundamental aspect of RPGs, I'd argue, at least with choice. Like Dark Souls, failure is a core mechanic
Oh,
of that
okay.
experience.
I have an interesting question.
Go for it.
For those who've played, I don't know that Jacob you have, but Fire Emblem RPG, yay or nay?
Oh.
Strategy RPG. I definitely consider that RPG.
Because there's definitely important elements of conversation between the characters. It builds up as your characters are close to each other in battle. Permanent character death. I mean, that's something, right?
Yeah. No,
Sounds like an RPG to me, and I haven't played it, so. But just from what you
Okay.
described, it sounds like it.
Tactics, I think. Tactics RPG.
Tactical RPG. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that's. Yeah, I guess that would be kind of a genre of its own. At the end
Yeah,
of the
I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics is in the same boat, other than does Final Fantasy Tactics have permadeath? Not on everybody, I believe.
Not on everyone. It's usually it's tied if you go to this specific area and you don't heal someone in time, then yeah, they can
Gonna
potentially
be like recruitable NPCs and whatever.
Yeah, sometimes it's story characters too, though. It depends on the game.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like I'll give it to Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Like the first story companion that you get at the beginning of the game, like he could die. He could straight up just die, and then he's just not in the cutscenes anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah, so sometimes they'll take risk, but yeah, more often than not, they're just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that notion of being afraid of letting players fail is definitely more present in RPG than probably any other playable game I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
But-
racing games, you can lose a race. Sports game, you can lose a game. Like it sucks, but
Okay.
it happens.
But wait, hold on a minute, because you have to understand that the reason that exists is because it's for player attention. They're afraid of losing a player potentially because they think the game's too hard. If you look at Forza Horizon, they have a rewind option in their races, right? You could like if you bump into a wall, you could be like, oh, whoops, like rewind time. I'm also, aside from a car enthusiast, I'm also a time wizard. So
Yeah, right.
everyone fucking loses.
Well, I think also a difference there is like with sports games, especially. There's a reasonable expectation that you're going to lose, especially if you're in like a race with 10 other people. Like chances are you're going to lose. But when you're playing like a single player game, the idea of losing for a lot of
Yeah.
people it just doesn't sit well with them.
Especially in the grand scheme of most of those games, you're supposed to be the hero that never fails and that
Yeah.
does the unthinkable. So, yeah. Can you imagine an RPG where the main character isn't special in any meaningful way and can just be replaced on
Oh, you
death
mean
or
Kenshi?
on a whims?
Kingdom
But
Come
does
Deliverance?
is Kenshi an RPG?
I mean, you have characters with stats that you can.
Yeah, but
set to be-
are those stats representative of who they are? Not what they are, who they are.
I mean, to some degree, I'd
When
say.
you have a barbaric, like, how can I put this? Like,
Yeah,
a
characters have
moral-
personalities. Like certain, like okay, there are random characters in the game that you can just recruit, but there are also like named characters and such that have personalities, and they talk to you as you're running around in the world and such. There is a story to Kenshi. It's just not one that's immediately, I guess.
It's not a linear
visible.
story.
Yeah, no, by no means is it a linear story. And once again, that's one of those games that like it relies heavily on the player to kind of make their own adventure.
I feel like Kenshi is more of a sandbox than an RPG. Well, it's a
Yeah.
sandbox with RPG elements.
Exactly.
And I guess that's where I'm starting, and probably what started the whole basis of that discussion, is that so many things try to incorporate elements of RPG that it is very present, very gallivanted term that's being used a lot, but maybe it's not necessarily wrongfully,
Hmm.
because a lot of games do incorporate, even if it's minimalistic, they do make an attempt of incorporating those elements.
Yeah.
But just to answer your question from earlier, another game, I think Kingdom Come Deliverance, you play as an ordinary kind of.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You don't get much more basic bitch than your character
No,
in
eh?
Kingdom Come Deliverance, at least at the start. Survival is difficult, and it's not a survival game. It's just, oh, you live in the Middle Ages, have fun.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
that's
and the
how it
Middle
was.
Ages were a time. What a
Yeah.
time to be alive. Okay, another question then.
Yeah, please.
Farm Simulator RPG, yeah or nay?
You're pulling a me here.
Oh boy. Nope. The argument being that it's a simulator,
It's good enough for me.
Fair enough.
right?
Here's another one, though. Is The Sims an RPG?
No,
no,
it's a
simulator.
dollhouse.
Oh,
It's a very specific kind of simulator. Yeah, it's a dollhouse.
I don't know. I feel like you could probably try. I don't want to even bother, but with Farming Simulator and The Sims, like
The thing
I don't
about
have
The
it in here right
Sims
now.
that makes it a dollhouse more than an RPG is that you're none of the characters and all of the characters.
Yeah.
You can push the characters around and get them to do things that aren't what they wish they were doing, but it will come to a point where the characters will fight back. If you're not constantly bombarding a character with tasks and he needs to go pee, he's gonna find a time to go pee in between two tasks that you give it.
Are you RPing God then?
yes.
If you make
Yeah.
that case, then the case can be made that you're RPing God in so many games that aren't RPGs. You're like the ultimate watcher. You're role playing as the watcher of the universe, just seeing life unfold before his eyes.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean,
I think
there's an
I think-
argument to be made.
Yeah, and I think maybe not
If
so
you
much The
take enough
Sims, but
psychedelics, you'll definitely feel like you're RPing God.
if you want to take Sims to its RPG next logical step, Crusader Kings. That's Crusader Kings an RPG. I don't know how many of you played it, but
Oh, right.
I know Dan, you played a bit at least.
Yeah. I mean, it's a kingdom simulator, so it can kind of fall under a lot of those same arguments.
I mean, the
But-
one element of definition that I gotta ask if it's present or not is there meaningful choice in real
Yeah,
life?
and I'll say this too:
definitely.
you play as one character, like you have a character you control, and
Then it
you
could very well be
you have
a simulation
stats,
of kingdom with RPG elements.
you have perks, you have like certain buffs that you get based off certain life events. You make decisions not just like going to war, but interacting with other fancy pants people and stuff, and having babies and shit. And so yeah, no,
Passing down lineages.
yeah. I think I would put Kingdom Come, obviously an RPG, like Crusader Kings as an RPG. At least
Okay.
Crusader Kings 3, because it really goes all in on like you are this character, you build him how you want, his
Yeah.
things define who he is. You literally have personality traits, and like you have scenarios that come up. It's like, oh, are you gonna help these people who you caught like stealing food from your royal farm stand, or are you gonna help them, or are you just gonna hang them because they're stealing from you? You know, and like that
Although it could be argued potentially that it's not really an RPG because of how much it relies on RNG being a factor. Your
No,
personality
there's
traits aren't
nothing
shown.
against RNG
yeah,
in
what is
RPGs.
that? How is that
There's
detract
nothing
from an
against
RPG?
in
I mean, are
RNG
you-
and RPGs.
don't
Too
know.
many acronyms. There's really nothing against it.
No, I don't
Because
have-
ultimately, one of the biggest lotteries, one of the biggest RPGs of life is your genetic makeup. That's a huge 50-50 on each pair
Yeah.
of chromosomes that you have
And-
in you. And you're playing yourself in real life.
and just
Yeah,
look at
rough.
D&D.
You're no less a person because your stat. Yeah, in D&D we
D-
random
D-
roll
D-
stats.
No, that's true.
Dice rolls by themselves are RNG.
The basis of the storytelling in D&D is hinging on RNG. Does your
Yeah.
character succeed or fail? Well, roll a dice.
Right.
We'll
What,
see.
what encounter do you come across this day as I roll on my table? It's like, oh, the big dragon or the little bear. Like, that's RNG, like to the core, unless the DM's making every one of those decisions. But if you're rolling on on an encounter sheet and you have a list of like 10 encounters, that's RNG. Because if they're varying difficulties and
as
stuff,
soon
like
as there's
there's
a
a
dice
set
roll
amount,
involved.
sure, but I mean, very few things are truly like never-ending procedural thing. But like any sort of RNG, like that's definitely can be in RPGs.
That's a fair.
Wait, so real life is an RPG?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's the ultimate RPG.
That's
Oh,
why we
shit.
play RPGs, to find a better life.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
my God.
escapism. RPGs is born of this tendency of people to seek escapism in the face of adversity.
Yeah. I'm living my best life as Master Aesra Gotun, the Zabrak Jedi Sage, you know? Like that's who I really want to be.
Basically.
I don't know that I wish I was the character I'm playing right now.
No, if you're playing
Wannabe Blade of Dark Moon that's just helping people who are being invaded by these jerk red phantoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be a character in any game from
I would
Software
love to
develops.
be a hunter in Bloodborne. I would love to be a
You want
hunter in
to be in that
Bloodborne.
world? You would want to live in Yarnum? That place?
Yeah, man.
That place is scurry,
Fuck
man.
yeah, man.
You crazy motherfucker.
I'm gonna get
Fuck
killed.
yeah, man. Walking around with like 200 pounds of steel on my back and a sword in my hand and a gun and just walking around all badass, killing everything in my way. You bet I'd wish.
But if you're not so
And then
good at
slowly
killing
turn
things-
into a beast as I'm killing and killing and killing more. Yeah, for sure, man.
But if you're not so good at the killing part, then you're
Then you
gonna
just
be.
die and get reborn in the Hunter's Dream and you start over.
I don't want to do that. Okay, it's on my
It's
back.
Groundhog Day.
fun.
It's Groundhog Day every day.
Well, that's like real life. So there's some similarities there.
I've been feeling like I was in a bit of a Groundhog week every week since 2020. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, imagine for those of
Can
us that at least
relate.
didn't have a job to
Oh.
mess up our day a little bit.
yeah, the big difference is because I still have a job.
Yeah.
Like for me, my Groundhog Day is more like a week because from one week to another, it's very similar.
Yeah. You know, at least I had a move to distract me for a while. But now it's like, oh my god, I've already been here for like a month. What the fuck?
For me, it was
Yeah.
building my PC. That was the
Yeah.
biggest numbing agent.
I want to do that so badly.
Oh man,
That's-
me too. Don't get me wrong. I finished this one and I told myself this is the last one for a while. And every time I look at it, I'm like, I want to tear it to pieces and build it again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the thing.
I have a question.
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
it will definitely get into spoiler territory. So
Boy.
we
Spoiler alert.
some of them may not be able to be said depending on how people feel, but I want to
Cool.
ask it anyway. So maybe have a spoiler safe one as well. What's your favorite moment where you in an RPG where you made a decision and you saw the outcomes? Like which decision in any RPG you played was the one that
Ooh.
either like you loved the most or impacted you the most or whatever.
Well, just want to say before anyone says anything, yeah, please warn. I'm so spoiler sensitive.
Yeah,
I
me
will
too.
drink my help.
Say the game you're going to give the reference from before you tell it, and then we'll tell you if it's okay.
Yeah, basically.
That's gonna require a serious noggin scratching.
Yeah, we can switch to a less intensive question for the time
No,
being.
it's
but-
good. No, it's good. It's good.
I need to think. Yeah.
I think I have one. And it's a little counterintuitive because it's a very fringe case RPG, but it's a case that we made was valid as RPG. Catherine. Picking one of the two Catherines was extremely heavy of meaning at the time I made that choice, because you're playing the role of Vincent, which is an engaged man who's basically picking between his wife or his mistress.
Isn't there a third
So-
one now?
Yeah, and if you play the full body edition, there's a third one. I don't know how she comes into play, though. I haven't played that version. I have it, just never got around to playing it. I wish I did, but I just can't get myself to pick up my Switch and play it for some odd reason. As much as I love that little console, I just can't get myself to play it.
Too many games, too little time. It's classic.
There you go. Exactly. Like, all the good games are there, and I just couldn't be bothered.
I don't want you to go too far into spoiler territory and Catherine, even though I've already gotten some spoilers. I really do want to play
Well,
it. I know it's been a long time.
that's the crux of it. I'm not going to talk anymore. That's the crux of it. Making the choice between the two Catherines was probably my biggest choice in video game.
Wow. Okay. I understand that because I don't.
Because of the moral implications are very grounded. They're very down to earth. A
It's a
lot
real-
can be said about the intense choices that you have to make in a game like Mass Effect, but ultimately, just seeing how down to earth a choice was, like that choice was, and how relatable it could be,
Oh yeah.
it resonated a lot more because of how I could interpret it in terms of real life choices. Because it's a very, very mundane, very common. I hate to say how common it is, but it's a choice that more people are faced with than the fate of the galaxy.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, quite unsurprisingly, but so yeah, that would be it for me probably. Like off the top of my head, without giving 3 weeks of thinking to that question, that's probably
Yeah.
my answer.
All right.
God damn.
Well, I can throw an easy one out there, just off the top of my head. One of the first ones that really made me think for a bit in Mass Effect was when you had to choose between Kaden and Ashley,
Oh yeah,
Oh,
right.
classic.
class. Yeah.
and then right after where you're like, "Oh, do I kill Rex now?" Like,
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
enough killing. Stop it.
like that.
Especially
That
since Rex comes off as such a cool character.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's got
And he's there
such a
the whole
great sense of
trilogy,
humor.
Yeah.
like that whole part of the game on that planet, like with Sovereign's speech and everything.
Chunka?
Like, it's
Oh
just-
yeah.
No, like where you choose between Kaden and Ashley.
Oh
It's,
right. Novaria. No, not
No.
Novaria. Fuck.
Vermeer?
Yes. That's
yes.
it. Yes, that's it. Yeah, that whole planet, it's probably one of like just my favorite moments in any game. But yeah, the way things play out there and the choices you just have to make there at that point in the game are really good. Another one I won't go into detail because it is spoilery, but Julian, just when you realize the decisions and how they impact the Bloody Baron storyline in The Witcher 3, like there's a decision whether or not to free a certain individual from a certain tree that completely like can change how the story
Money.
plays out, and it's like you'll have no idea that like the consequences of this action until it's too late, and it's just like holy shit. And honestly, I could give like more examples in The Witcher 3 than in most other games combined, but I won't because this isn't a Witcher 3 cast.
Yeah.
But
You'd
yeah, The
probably
Witcher,
be alone with Julian on that one.
yeah, me and Julian will just sit here and talk about it, but
We've
yeah,
done that already.
yeah, we definitely have. But we'll do it again because it's never too much. Yeah.
The Bloody Baron one, I know which your choice you're talking about, and I remember one of my friends was watching me play. I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but during that quest, my friend had already played the quest, and he explained everything to me before I made my decision. So it lost like every ounce of
gravitas,
like,
just disappeared.
Yeah, I was like, well, I saw it. Look, it changed that because I knew the outcome rather than the outcome being like hidden. I knew the outcome. I still had to make a tough decision, but it was like a lot more informed, and it changed the outcome a lot for me.
Because if you don't know, like at the end of that arc, it gives you like a little slideshow thing where it's like it lets you know that this was the decision you made that led to this outcome. Right after it happens, you're just like, oh my god.
I almost made the opposite choice too. I was gonna make the opposite choice till my friend told me, and then I thought about it and picked the alternative one. So I was a bit disappointed that I didn't. But okay, that I wouldn't pick that as my make it or break it moment. The moment that like got me to my knees. I almost want to pick like a Telltale game, but I know that's not really an RPG. So I'll think of something else.
More interactive novels than RPGs.
Yeah,
because those tore me to pieces. Like Walking Dead and Wolf Among Us. Like there's Batman even. Batman had tons of choices that I was like, well, I don't know. Like, make it for me. I don't want to think about this. That's probably Mass Effect. When I think about it, I know that the choice that's probably tearing me to pieces it was probably something in Mass Effect. I gotta think about it still a little more for me.
Well, Dan, do you have anything ready to
a pretty big choice I could think of. I mean, I hate to go back to KOTOR every time, but like...
Don't. Yeah, I am unashamedly pushing Witcher 3 at every moment, so don't be ashamed to push KOTOR.
I mean, like, just... It's when you get to the end game and you're on that, like, the special Lehan planet or whatever with the Rakatans and whatnot, and you have to make that choice of, like, are you going to betray your friends? Are you going to betray everything that you fought for up until this point because of this realization? And that whole fucking moment just being explained and then them showing the flashbacks of it being hinted at like throughout the game. It was just a really, really, really nice experience and probably my favorite choice in gaming. It was a defining... That all goes back to my first argument about what makes a great RPG choice. That was a game with choice, you know? So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, don't be afraid to push the games you love. I'll talk about Catherine any chance I get.
Oh,
don't worry about
I
it.
can talk about Catherine too. God, it's a great game.
You should honestly be worried about me if I don't mention The Witcher in one of our podcasts.
I went as far as to import like a limited edition magazine from Japan because they were talking about the game a bunch and had a bunch of like story art, storyboard, and concept art.
Nice.
I can't read anything that's in the magazine. I just look at the pretty pictures. It's Japanese. Like I could learn, but what are the odds that I'll do that in my living time?
Mm-hmm.
I have another mention for a beloved choice, although it doesn't really... It's questionable whether it's an RPG choice, but like the final decision you make when you're done Nier Automata, that took me some while to decide what I wanted to do.
Oh my god, that tore me to pieces.
That was pretty good. Okay, I'll give you that. Because that was a weird conflict of interest between myself as a gamer and myself.
Yeah, well, I know you and me, we went opposite ways on it in the end, I think. Like you...
We definitely... I'm the only person
Which one of the two of you is the bastard that didn't help?
I'm the bastard.
He's the fucker.
I'm the bastard. And I'm the only one I know. I don't know anyone who's like me. I'm like... No, I'm like...
Like your emotions were turned off that day or something. Like
help was given and you denied it to others.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with my save files. For me, are like the most precious thing I own. Mm-hmm. And when I go through tragedies of like something shorting or like a hard drive failing, and
memory card corrupted.
Yeah. When that stuff happens to me, I become like devastated. So I was like, like, what if I want to do side quests still? What if there's still things I want to experience?
Play it again.
No,
but you can't capture that same feeling in a bottle. I had the exact same thing happen when I was going because I picked up a Wii because my GameCube, my parents had sold it, but I had all these Wii games and I had the memory cards, and I wanted to open up my first Animal Crossing village, which I had kept for like years and years and years. And then I get into the game, and wouldn't you know it, it's corrupted, and like it was a devastating moment of like not just like the fact that yes, the data is gone and whatnot, but it's just those memories I could never access them as well as I could if I had it in front of me. There'll always be the echo, but I'll never have that thing right in front of me. and that was it's a moment of loss. So I understand where you're coming from, not wanting to get rid of your save file. But yeah, I mean, also dick move because someone else did that for you.
Like I get it on principle. I lost all my Dark Souls 2 saves when the first DLC came out. So
Yeah.
but this was like no. If I want to play more, I'll play it again. This game earned at least that much from me.
Yeah.
Also, just do all the side quests before you finish the game, Julian.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I was going to be confronted with this kind of choice. at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
What game does that?
None, which is why it's genius.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I agree. It made me think. Like I had to stop. I didn't
I
like wasn't
hesitated.
impulsive.
I hesitated, and when you actually do the choice, and you see your menus and everything being taken away, I was like, did I make the wrong choice?
Hmm.
Like I hesitated for a bit because I was like, what if I fucked up?
yeah.
What if, like Julian, I want to go back and do more? But in the end, I lived with it. I had to. It was done. And then you get a neat background for it.
Yeah, I made it my cover picture on Facebook immediately, and I think it's still that.
Pretty sure it is, yeah.
It's been 4 years now. But yeah, no, that game just. Ugh.
That was definitely one of the weird questions that a game ever asked of me.
Yeah.
Especially since, who is being asked that question? In the scope of the game, it's breaking fourth wall to ask the player,
Yep.
people came to
Yeah.
help you, what do you do?
Yeah.
Yo, this game isn't about me, leave me out of this.
It's no, we're making it about you now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my choice, and that's why I don't want to forget. I'm gonna throw out an easy one for me, just from I think it was Mass Effect 2. I feel like this isn't right. I feel like it's got to be one of the choices regarding the Quarians and the
Geth.
Geth.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Geth. A lot of the Geth choices really were tough. Deciding the fate of the Geth. The fate of
Yeah.
the Geth, I think, might be one of the hardest decisions I had to make.
Especially
even remember what I
considering the whole grand scheme of things, because either way you look at it, both parties are kind of in the wrong on that one.
Yep.
So it's you get to pick who was quote unquote right,
Who was less in the
Yes,
wrong,
yeah.
basically.
who redeem themselves the better
Yeah.
in that whole story. And I think neither do, but that's me.
Yeah. And then
But
when
yeah,
you make
that's
your
definitely
decision,
one of the
and,
tough choices. But
and
then
then-
again, for me, it wasn't It wasn't as difficult because I was a huge Quarian fanboy. I went as far as to play Quarian when we did a Mass Effect D&D.
I think you said tally.
Oh, sick.
What that?
I think you said tally wrong.
No, I really mean
Stop
Quarian.
simping.
I mean all of it. I mean all of it. But yes, Tally, and no small. Tally definitely helped. It facilitated for sure. For sure.
I
And
have to say,
I have to say that getting Tally's picture at the end of Mass Effect 3, if you did everything right, for me,
Oh, yeah.
felt like an accomplishment because I was always so curious to see behind that fucking mask.
It's just
that
a shame.
finally getting it was just yes.
It's a shame they didn't put much more effort into a Google stock image in that, but it is what it is.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Come on, you can't make a still piece of art
You
for this
can't be
character's
bothered.
face reveal. Come
You
on.
can't be bothered.
I actually never really liked Tally or the Quarians. I'm sorry to say,
That's fine.
but
you have your opinion.
It's fine. You're dead to me.
You-
Whatever.
Yeah,
But-
but
You can be wrong. It's okay.
I'm gonna poison you in your sleep.
That's okay. I preferred the
For
Gatsby
later.
too, so I'm
But
with you.
I found it I didn't know people loved Tally. Apparently, I found out later when after I'd played the games of it, I'm like, oh, whatever, Tally's Tally. I don't really care. And then later I found out that people love Tally and the Quarians, and I
Yeah,
was like,
people are
really?
simping over Tally.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea. I guess I didn't talk to her that much. She was just one of the characters I didn't really focus on. So I missed that. I didn't develop much of a feeling for her. I still I mean, I'm kind of a shitty gamer for doing this, but when I played the scene in 3 where I let her die and then I reload, I was like, no. I'm like, no one dies. This is my
No
save
one
file.
died on my watch.
Yeah.
So I just reloaded and I was like, nobody's dying. Come on, let's be real here.
Yeah.
Except for I guess Thane and Morden, because
They would
Oh.
die anyways.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah.
Morden would get killed by
Just
the
later.
Krogan.
Yeah, there's one way or another. So well,
Oh,
but I feel
yeah.
good about it.
Actually, now that you bring it up, I changed my answer, deciding to stop Morgan from curing the genophage.
Morden.
Mass Effect 3 was Morden was pretty goddamn devastating.
Why would you stop him?
Because I was playing an asshole file.
Oh, you were like a dick.
Yeah,
But-
I was
And you see,
specifically
that's
playing
where those choices become really interesting, because I feel like playing asshole Shepard, he would relate a lot to the Krogans and you would want to help them.
I mean, potentially.
There is no right choice. That is
Yeah,
what I'm
that's
saying. Because
exactly, yeah.
regardless of how you take this problem, you can come up in your head canon as to reasons of why you would do one thing or another. Which is why this choice is another beautiful one.
You can shoot him, right? You can shoot Morden there.
You can shoot him. You can shoot him
Shoot
in
him
the
in
back.
the back. Holy
Yeah.
shit! Like,
You can tell him not
Yeah, it's
to,
brutal.
and you can just let him do it.
how could you fucking shoot? Like, even role playing, I would have such difficulties shooting
Oh,
Morden.
man.
That's
Honestly,
the ultimate dick move.
Do yourself a favor and like watch the scene on YouTube or something. It's
That's
so
the ultimate
good.
dick move. Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, just
everybody
put
in
Garrus
that
while you're at
scene's
it.
bad.
Yeah, exactly. Goddamn.
Garrus, yeah, what's up? You're my best friend, Shepard. Yeah, well, I'm gonna murder you for no apparent reason.
Yeah, exactly. Tragic. What tragic characters?
Yeah.
Shepard is a broken toy, man.
Mhm.
There's just man. And speaking of powerful moments in gaming, how ballsy is it to introduce your character in Mass Effect 2 by despacing him and killing him?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wait,
I was
Yeah, it's
like
pretty awesome.
watching my screen with my jaw wide open, and like the RP potential of something like this is insane.
Mhm.
Because from there on in, the whole idea that Shepard isn't who he used to be is the door is wide open.
Yeah.
Like, go for it. And
Yeah.
it opens so many possibilities in terms of RPG that I think this is, in my opinion, definitely one of the good openings for a follow-up to an RPG that allows you
Yep.
to redesign your character in between.
Yeah.
such a cool opening.
And I'll take that sentiment a step further. I think the whole amnesia kind of reimagining amnesia trope is present in some of the best story-driven RPGs, like especially ones where it's like you say, like you want to kind of reinvent the character. Well, that's why like The Witcher 1 has Geralt have amnesia, so you can kind of experience the
You can kind
world
of not
fresh with
know-
him,
Yeah.
and kind of still like then it kind of justifies shaping him to do things that like a purist book reader would be like he would never do that, but like okay, well he lost his memory, and
I
you're kind of
think
taking
the
control. It's like
the amnesia is a little bit. I hate to call it lazy because it can be done well, but it definitely is like one of the lower hanging fruits in terms
it's
of reimagining story. But it's
Cliche.
definitely an option to be explored, and it
Well,
can be done to great effectiveness.
and
Definitely.
I think especially in video games, it's not just with The Witcher. There's two others where it's like, yeah, okay, maybe a low hanging fruit, but man, this fruit's got some juice potential because guess
of
what?
course.
That's
I'm not-
that's what
There's
makes
a reason. There's a reason. Common grounds become common grounds.
Yeah.
It's because they're effective at what they mean to do.
And-
like that whole amnesia in the beginning of Witcher 1, I haven't read all of the books. And to be able to experience the world kind of fresh and then read the books in parallel and go, oh, well, the Geralt I'm playing and the Geralt I'm reading are two slightly different people. Contiguous in many ways, but slightly deviant from one another. And that goes to show the importance of memory on who we are as people and who our characters are as people.
For
yeah.
sure.
And I think
I saw a whole show of roleplay that was tabletop roleplay that was based on that whole notion of characters holding on or letting go of some memories and how knowing or not knowing things influence them as characters.
yeah. Well, there's two other games that do the amnesia thing, but not like for the same reasons as The Witcher, that are just doing this as part of its overall story. Well, you have Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah.
Because you full on have super amnesia at the start of that game, and then
Super amnesia. You don't
me-
remember how to breathe.
yeah, and to me, one of, if not the best written story ever put into a video game, Planescape Torment also has the amnesia trope off the bat, and it plays on it so well. Like you should, like Louis, you should play Planescape. You really should. Like you would absolutely
I'll add
eat
that
it
list
up.
to my endless list of titles I definitely need to get through before I die.
Basically.
I'm telling you, the bulk of my bucket list of things to do before I die is to finish all the games people recommended.
Yeah.
Because for the rest of what is usually on that kind of bucket list, I'm either done or pretty much don't care. So yeah, there's
Fair.
definitely a lot of games on my waiting list. If I can just stop playing the same games again and again, that would be a great
Yeah.
help.
You just got to force yourself to try to do new things or at least progress the things
Well,
you're
I
doing.
have. I've picked up Valhalla.
But
Valhalla. Yeah, well, Valhalla and Valheim.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
that's great.
Valheim RPG, Yerne.
I was thinking about that.
Well, I guess that depends on how you view the whole survival. I don't know what you call that. Like, is Ark an RPG? Is Minecraft an RPG? Like,
I think they're not.
yeah, I don't think
I'm
so either.
throwing it out there, but I think they're not.
I'm
Like
with you on that.
Valheim does this thing where
Yeah.
it kind of pins you as a character like that's got a bigger goal than simple survival. Like you're seeking to ascend to Valhalla or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not enough on its own to make it an RPG. There's no like, if at all, meaningful choice, at least to my knowledge.
I
No.
haven't played Valheim at all, and I'm going to take this as an opportunity to go on a bathroom break. I'll be right back, guys.
Sure.
Unacceptable. That's good.
Aw.
But no, I don't think those type of sandbox survival games are, at least not, what we mean by RPGs.
They're definitely not standard RPGs if they are.
No. They have some of the key elements, usually like building your character stats, but
Yeah.
even then some of them can be pretty samey on how you can approach combat. Like Minecraft, sure, you have different tiers of weapons, but like it doesn't matter if it's an axe or a
Equipping
pickaxe,
gear-
you're swinging it. Like that's it.
I find
Like,
a lot of games give themselves the RPG element moniker because of like, oh, you get to equip gear. Yeah,
Yeah.
but always upgrading your gear to just the best tier available. It's not an RPG, it's a logical choice.
yeah.
If given the choice in real life between a shitty car and a good car, you'll take the good car. Like, no questions asked. I'm asking you to cook, you have the choice between a blunt knife and a sharp knife. I sure hope to God you're taking the sharp knife, otherwise I don't give much life expectancy to the tip of your fingertips.
no, exactly.
Yeah, welcome to Jackasters.
Don't worry, I've worked with a knife for 12 years. I know what it's like to work with a dull blade.
Oh yeah.
This is the thing, though. I don't know what it's like to work with a sharp blade.
He never had the chance, man.
I've never had that luxury.
It's never been sharp. That's the secret.
Yeah. Yeah. Fucking Jax.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to work in general, I guess. But
Yeah. Okay.
RPGs.
Yeah,
RPGs,
and you two,
man.
like honestly, like you should both play Planescape. It's D&D, like it's so good.
Oh yeah, I know. I know.
And it's so easy too. Like for that era of game, it's the easiest one by far because the combat's just like whatever.
It's very secondary, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
It's-
you brushed on the topic of combat. Can you
Yeah.
conceive of an RPG that doesn't involve combat?
that depends.
Not necessarily think of a
on-
title that actually exists.
Disco Elysium?
Is there no combat in Disco Elysium?
I don't know, but there
I
is.
haven't played enough to say for sure. Because that's the thing. It depends what you mean. Like, because does it need to be combat or does it just need to be encounters? And does it need to be like here's an example. There's a Witcher game called Thronebreaker, which has like a full-fledged story, decisions, all that stuff. But there's no combat. It's just you play the card game Gwent instead as your gameplay loop.
It's kind of like the Pokemon trading card game,
Yeah.
where the
but-
bulk of your confrontations were just casual card duels.
Yeah, and so like this game has like a full-fledged story and everything, and like there are battles happening, but gameplay-wise, they're being played out through this card game. But I'd still say like it's an RPG because it has like story, choice, consequence,
So
characters.
Thronebreaker?
Yeah,
Okay.
but we're basically saying like there's
RPG with or without combat. Can you conceive of an RPG without combat?
1000% yes.
Cool. All right, we're on the same page on that one.
Because role playing doesn't necessarily mean you're fighting.
Yeah, role playing
No.
doesn't mean fighting at all.
Like Undertale. I mean, that's a con. I guess there's
Undertale.
other
Oh,
things
that's a
there.
beautiful example, actually.
Yeah, hey?
Undertale can be done entirely pacifist.
Yep, and you have like
Pet the
stats,
dog. Pet
but-
the dog. Pet the dog.
Exactly.
I think one way or another you need some sort of gameplay loop, but it doesn't have to necessarily
Right.
be bashing heads in. It could be as simple as like a puzzle or a card game or
An investigation.
or just dialogue, extensive
Dialogue,
dialogue. You know,
Detroit
like that.
becoming human.
I'd say dialogue is a lot more important to an RPG, like dialogue
Right.
choices than any sort of combat system.
I think dialogue is definitely the easiest motor of character development.
Yeah.
Because if it's true that a character's action says a lot about who he is, his reaction and speech can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment to make on that, which I find interesting. In games like with non-blank slate characters, games like Witcher,
Yeah.
I find that for me, like something happened in Assassin's Creed Valhalla that made me realize that I do kind of like that sometimes the choice is not mine. There's like there were a couple of choices where Eivor did something like really rash.
Yeah.
I didn't choose that, and I was like, I love that he did that because that it shows that's his character. Now there's like a clear boundary. There are things that are within that boundary, like Geralt could say that, or he could say that. Same with Eivor. Okay, there's some things he could say, but there are things that are so outside of his realm, like he can't accept it so much that he'll act out without your input. He'll say, no, that's where he draws the line. He can't accept that. And dynamic between your choices of what the dialogue's going to show of that character and the character just going on their own and being like, no, I'm making this choice myself. There's no other choice that can exist here.
Yeah,
and that
often,
shows
often
the limits.
yeah, I find that often those kind of forced choice, I hate to call them even choice,
Yeah.
but those moments where the game kind of forces your hand have a lot to do with having the character act on emotions that the player might not be resonating to at the moment. Like an anger that might have been lingering in the back of a character's mind, the player might not feel that anger, but as a character, like something like being betrayed or feeling like you're being betrayed by Sigurd or by whoever it is you're interacting with. I didn't get that far into Valhalla, so I'm not too sure about how things fall apart. I just know that they do because the game's made that way.
Yeah.
But like by that point, I can very well imagine that it's the only thing that Eivor is thinking about. Like he just had something prophesized to him. I didn't. Like as a player, I might have. Like I witnessed the prophecy being told to him.
Yeah.
But I might not be experiencing the whole turmoil of feelings that he is. Like, I'm not the one living in, like, medieval Norse era. So there is a lot of these choices that weigh, there are a lot of these life elements that weigh upon his choices that I'm impervious to just on behalf of that fourth wall.
It's not
And-
just that though. It's his his convictions. It's
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
there's specific, and they come to the surface sometimes when it's like, okay, he can kill people. Yeah, it's no problem. He'll murder, but he's also really, it's all about honor and loyalty. And if you ask him to break loyalty, he like goes off the rails. Like he's like, no, like anything
Yeah.
but that. So it shows his limits because you can't. If you made a decision there in the dialogue, like, okay, I break my loyalty, it would destroy the character they built.
Yeah. When you have a predetermined character like that, you have to accept that there's going to be certain aspects of them that are set in stone, and if there's certain moments where you're not in control, as long as it tracks with what the character should be doing, like as long as you're not like taking control of my hand and making him do something that just makes absolutely no sense for how I built him / how you've even presented him to me. Because like, yeah, you want to make sure it makes sense, and that's kind of why it doesn't work in Fallout, because you don't have any desire to even like be that way beforehand because of the expectations of having a free reign character. But if you go into the game knowing it's going to be this way, and as long as they don't contradict themselves in taking control, then I have no problem with it. And I think it can be very effective too to drive certain key moments of a story home.
Yeah, I wasn't of those who were upset at how family-driven Fallout 4 was, and that you couldn't wander away from this idea that your character might not want to run after a child that he might assume is dead or whatever. For one thing, I am not a parent myself, so I don't know how strong that instinct of, I gotta make sure that my children's alive. I don't know how hard that would pull on a character. So I wasn't going to be the one to harp on, well, I kind of dislike that they voiced the character this or that way, or that they kind of strong-armed you into that quest of looking for a dead or possibly dead child. Because again, I didn't know how much something like this would tug at someone's soul.
Yeah, I think the point with
But-
Fallout though is like it should not be like, for one, like it could pull or it could not, depends on the person.
yeah.
And the point of Fallout is you get to choose whether or not you're that person.
But yeah,
And
that's
it
where
didn't.
that's
Whereas
where
with The Witcher, like Witcher 3 is the main purpose, the main quest is to find your adoptive daughter, like very similar, but like especially if you have read the books, but even if you haven't, the game does a good job of making you buy in on it and convincing you that, okay, this is what Geralt would want to do. So yeah, if you're going to kind of direct the character or direct the story in some way, you just have to make it
make it
good and believable. And that's why, like, in some ways I almost prefer predetermined characters over full blank slates, because I appreciate the narrative boost it can give, as long as like the narrative it's doing is something I want to
It
experience.
certainly helped give some direction.
Yeah. And so with a game like The Witcher, it works, and even like Mass Effect, because even Shepard, like,
I love the way they did
Like,
it in Mass Effect.
yeah, like he is a blank slate in the sense that like you can do a lot, but he's still predetermined to be like this, heroic figure, whether he's a
He's
dick
a
or
war
not.
hero,
He's
but
a
they
war-
don't go into the details of how.
Yeah, they don't give you a family.
So it could be that Shepard was just this fucking rampaging Rambo-style character
Yeah.
that made no distinction between friend or foe and just kicked ass. Just as
Yeah.
much as he could have been this benevolent like commander on the field that made sure everybody was safe and to ponder the weight of each and every one of his actions. And that's totally left blank for the player to head
Yeah.
canon.
Yeah, whereas I feel like Fallout did too much of the work itself.
Yeah,
with its
that
character.
might be true.
Because
certainly might be
Mass
true.
Effect kind of really like finds that perfect balance where you feel like you're in control of the character, but there's still enough structure there so he can play the role that Shepard is meant to play, regardless of his personality.
Yeah, the backstory isn't overbearing. It's
No.
just there for.
Yeah. Whereas with The Witcher, obviously, Geralt's backstory, especially in Witcher 3, is very apparent. But like you buy into that, the game helps you, buy into that, and once you do, like it's you can see the benefits in the storytelling. Yeah. And obviously you get like that's why the stories are usually so weak in Bethesda games, is because like there's nothing
There's
to
no
like
proper
propel
way
it like
to
that,
account for the 700 different play strats that you could have
Exactly.
determined and the
Yeah.
countless interactions between different storylines.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and that's why like one isn't necessarily better than the other as far as like the type of player character. It's just make sure you're doing what you're good at and doing it well instead of trying to be something you're not.
Make
Like
sure what you're doing serves what you're trying to say in the story.
yeah. And like just be true to yourself. Like I want Bethesda's next game to go back to being a blank slate character.
Give me another
and
prisoner
all
on the
that.
ship and
Yeah.
make me do whatever I want
But
to them.
if CD
Fully
Projekt
voiced
Red
character.
releases a Witcher 4 as a blank slate character, I'd be less excited for that because I'm feeling like it's not going to be as impactful narratively.
Witcher 4, like I don't know that they could keep going on forward with
They
the
won't.
story after Witcher. Probably
They've
like,
already
you could
said
prove me
Geralt's
wrong.
story is done, but I'm more
Yeah,
saying, okay,
okay.
are they going to still pick up on another pre-existing character like Ciri, or are they going to make a new predetermined character, or are they just going to like go the full Skyrim route? And I'm not like,
So like prequel and have you just be another Witcher.
yeah,
Yeah, just
which
make
I'm sure I
rectify
would
that.
still like, but like from them specifically, it's not what I want because I know their strength is in
It's harder to
The
tell a story
storytelling.
when you don't know who the main character is.
exactly.
They could establish one. They could make an original character with
Yeah,
as much depth.
that's
as
what I'm
Geralt.
wondering. Are they
Of
going to do
course.
that, or are they just going to be like do the Skyrim thing and you do what you want? And like for Bethesda, that I want that. From CD Projekt Red, I want the predetermined. It really depends from developer and from what you expect out of the game and what the best thing the game has to offer. Like sure, if Fallout could have done well on both, like there's a few games that like kind of hit the nail on the head with that mix of predetermined and blank slate character, like with Mass Effect, and I'd say Dragon Age does a pretty good job of it too. But if you can't pull that off, which is very hard to do, like it's gonna suck, and it did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, on all accounts, yeah.
yeah. It's like you are correct, sir. Yeah. Actually, I have a whole video on this.
Yeah.
I'll send a link. I'll give you guys a link to it if you're curious.
Sure.
Julian, I think you've seen it. I think I sent it to you when I made it, but it was probably a few years ago now.
Yeah, it's probably.
3 years ago. That's when I made the video. But yeah, so does anyone else to say on that topic? Any other questions to bring up? I have one other question I'm going to throw out there, but if anyone else has anything else.
I don't have anything immediate.
Okay. So here's another fun question. We'll give it a two-parter. How important are side characters / companions in an RPG, and which is your favorite?
Ooh.
I am Garrus.
That's an interesting two-parter. Okay.
Yeah, Garrus is pretty perfect.
Fuck Garrus. Overrated.
You blast.
How could you?
He's great, but he's nothing like he doesn't blow me away.
Overrated. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm saying he's overrated.
Oh my god.
Best side character in all of history was Navi, obviously. No, and I'm being extremely sarcastic.
I hope so.
Please don't interpret this as my actual answer. But
No, that's it. You're dead to the internet now. You're
committed
canceled.
forever. I've become a joke to the rest of the internet. I'll just retire from being a Twitch streamer, and that started today. So have fun, guys. And I'll
Yeah.
I just got my first follower today.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's cool. But oh man, best sidekick characters. Sidekick characters are vital. I don't think you can build. You never build an interesting character as the lone wolf character. And I was about to say something, but I'll hold back because I didn't call for that. But no, it was a joke on one of our friends, and I'm glad that Jacob and Dan picked up on it. But oh man, best sidekick. Holy shit.
Oh, there's so many, man.
There's so many good ones. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna start with the simple question. Like, how close to the main character throughout the game does the sidekick have to be considered sidekick?
I'd say consider
Like, are
them
you talking party members sidekick? Or
party
is the
members,
fire
but
keeper
like
a sidekick?
it can.
Like in the stream of Dark Souls, can the
I'll put
fire
it to you
keeper
like this. I think so. I put it like this: like the character's inner circle, and like, cause some games you don't have like a party system, like The Witcher 3, like you have missions where you're with characters, but he has his circle of friends that I would put in the same category as like exactly. So yeah, they don't have to be like traditional like party members, but like part of the character's inner circle.
Damn. I mean,
so not like a side merchant who's like really cool, but like, someone you have a relationship with.
Midnight
from Twilight Princess.
Oh wow, okay.
Midnight, yeah. I cried.
Of course. How could you not?
I cried.
Like, fuck Zelda. Zelda was they made her this cold, uncaring
Breath
bitch.
of the Wild Zelda is the best incarnation of Link and Zelda together that I've ever seen. I'll just say that right now, right here.
Oh yeah.
Fight me.
Hands down.
But
Can't argue with you. They're my only experience.
oh no, like they played on that really well in Skyward Sword because they hint at the romance in Skyward Sword like a little bit, but the way they do it in Breath of the Wild is so much better because you can interpret everything that's happening in Breath of the Wild as either deep care or actual romance. And at this point, it makes it a bit of an RP thing of what do you as Link perceive these memories to be. And that's another game with a huge amnesia element that plays really well, where you're hunting down those locations that bring back memories. And those memories that are brought back are usually like 100 years ago, memories of a better time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I like that aspect of it a lot. Like all the flashbacks were good. I love those in Breath of the Wild. Okay, but maybe we'll make it a little simpler. I know since some of you already answered it. Who's your favorite side character or companion in Mass Effect?
In Mass Effect?
Oh wow.
We'll start simple. Give it
Miranda.
one to a game. I mean, she was my main romance option.
No.
Okay. The thing about Mass Effect is that there's a character in the first one that felt really shallow, that developed a lot of depth as the games went along, and that's Liara.
Yeah, true.
Because in the
she's
first
good.
one, she's this clueless yet super old being because she's a Sari, so
Yeah.
she's like a couple hundred years old, but she's still considered nothing more than a child. And then in comes Mass Effect 2, where she's. Is it in Mass Effect 2 where she makes it to be the Shadow Broker? And,
Yeah,
like,
it's one of the DLCs.
like whoa,
Great
like
DLC too.
that's deep for a character, like a deep character progression from her going to just this researcher that's researching proteins and like
Happy-go-lucky
I have
little
no I
sorry
have
girl.
no knowledge of the universe.
Yeah.
And I resent my species' views and the universe's view on my species as being like super sexual and nothing more than tools of pleasure, if anything. But Liara, and the more I think about it, I think that's gonna be my final answer for the whole thing. Even though she was never my first choice of anything regarding Mass Effect, just the way that interaction between her and Shepard builds up to the point where in Mass Effect 3, you're like at this point where it's like they both know that they mean the world to each other, regardless of if it's a romantic feeling or not. At this point, it doesn't matter. But they both know that being close to each other is probably what's destroying them both, because they're both dealing with spheres of influence that is just dangerous to mix. I think it was an interesting play on characters.
Yeah, they definitely have one of the most interesting relationships in Mass Effect. I can agree with that.
Like I'm actively looking at games. Like
Yeah,
on my
I'm trying
shelf.
to spitball like ideas like.
I mean, I loved what's his face from Bayonetta. The clueless white guy.
The scarf guy.
Yeah,
Right.
the clueless white guy that's aware that something's going on, but he's like left in the dark by her because she's playing him like a fucking puppet, and it's just so
I
it's
never
so
understood his
adorable.
purpose.
What's
I didn't
that?
get what he was. I never understood what he was there for, though. I was always like, why is he? What's his deal? Why is he?
She's
in the
there
game?
to paint Bayonetta as a bit of a player. Like she likes to play with
okay.
people, but that's her favorite pet kind of thing.
Dom vibes.
Basically.
Yeah, huge. She's a huge like BDSM influence character, not just in the matters of her suit, but in the way it's a bit more of a
Punishments?
cute approach to it. But it's definitely there's definitely huge elements of bondage in her story.
When she kills like angels, when you do execution moves, you literally like, put them into like torture things. And, like, you whip them or something.
The whole game, and that's where I was so surprised at Nintendo
Yeah, that they
for
picked them
not
up.
only picking it up, but Bayonetta 2 is a Wii U exclusive.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh, Nintendo, like that's something I never understood about them,
Grew up,
because
you know?
they're usually so chaste and so reserved about some of those ideas. Like a game can't have a cross or a grave without it being like absolutely sterile of any like indication of faith and all of that. And then you see that game that's like it's sex on a stick, and then you're like,
Yep.
yeah, we want that shit. And I'm
her in
not
Smash.
surprised.
Yeah,
oh,
put her
yeah,
in Smash with, like,
yeah.
fucking
And she's a great
two-
character in Smash.
She was broken on the Wii U version, and then they nerfed her.
They
a bit, which is-
nerfed her a bit,
Yeah.
but if you know how to play her, like what made her strong isn't just like the stats behind what she does. There's the whole just what she does that's so potent. Just like Mega Man. If you know how to play Mega Man in Smash, he's gonna kick ass.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Like
It's one
that
of my
down smash, if you can get someone off the field and then down A, it's over. You're not coming back from that.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's another topic for another time though. Did
Yeah.
Smash go too far? Too many Smash game, too many characters. Discussion for later, I suppose.
Yeah, but
But,
back to
um,
the companions.
Companions. Pikachu is a pretty badass companion.
Yeah, it's pretty classic.
Um,
First companion most kids probably had. Well, I mean, if they chose it.
definitely. Well, yeah, whatever Pokemon you chose. to
Yeah,
be
whatever your
Pokemon
original
collection.
starter. Yeah,
That whole notion of like bonding with what's essentially a pet on steroids.
yeah.
It has very best sidekick is dog meat, of course.
Oh, boy.
Goodest boy.
He's all right.
I just love a video game that has you with a pet character,
Yeah.
like a dog character. or a
Again,
cat.
another reason why Dragon Age Origins is the perfect staple of RPGs.
Are there
Get 'em.
dogs and cats that you can recruit to your party?
You get a dog
Dog.
companion.
Nice.
Really?
Even Noble, I think, specifically.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
yeah,
Like
I
you start with
forgot. Oh,
Yeah, what-
yeah, it's true. I did have the dog with me. I forgot completely about him.
Yeah, and there's a mod to make him like not take up one of your party slots, so you can have him and a full party.
You can just have him. Nice.
Yeah, but I think some other good ones. HK47 has to be.
Oh
has
my
to
God.
be
I
mentioned.
studied him in a case study in class because he's such a good side character.
Yeah,
Amazing.
but I can't pick just one, so I'm gonna say in this case the game that I think has the best inner circle top to bottom, not just from like their own individual like stories and such, but more specifically on how all their stories intertwine with you as the main character. Is Planescape. The companions in Planescape are in a class of their own, and it's ridiculous
Yeah.
how good they are.
Yeah,
Like, and
I
again,
can't,
not
I
just
can't
on their
say
own
I can't
merits,
comment
but
on this for having
Yeah.
not played. If I had to pick a game with strong psychic game, any of the Mass Effect,
yeah,
because they're all a very rich, well elaborated character, both in terms
Except
of
James.
yeah,
Yeah.
just forget.
Fucking, that was just like what?
I mean,
What were they even
They needed
thinking?
one. They needed just a gym bro, and
Yeah,
they made James, and that's fine, I guess.
They already had Ashley still living, you know?
Ashley wasn't a gym bro though. She was the
she
military.
was a
jock.
racist.
Yeah.
She was the redneck of it.
Yeah.
She was there to be the redneck, but like, I like that Mice Effect. Sure, we're playing as rats now.
Oh.
But I like that it dared to allow for your party not to just be like, because it would have been so easy for them to just pin you with a bunch of human people and to fight the issue of racism by just seeing how your crew of human people deals with the aliens.
Hmm.
But to actually have the aliens be part of the team, I think it gave so much depth because you got to interact with racism at the expense of the Quarians was like all over the place in that story because they're basically the gypsies of that universe. And I'm sorry if the term gypsy is derogatory, but like that's what they were modeled to be. And to see that a member of your team is actively being denied and actively being shunned by people everywhere for no other reason than because she's Quarian, or to see that people are usually positive towards Liara for no other reason that, oh, well, not only is she an Asari, but she's Matriarch Benezia's daughter. Like, ooh, like big weight on there. And you can feel it everywhere that depending on which race your characters were from, the reaction of people around them was like, yeah, everybody likes Garrus. Like, he's still an alien on board and people are still not hot to the idea. But people respect his race because, like, they're fierce warriors, they're people of honor, and they know that for as long as they keep on his good side, then he'll be true to his word, and he'll be just another soldier in their platoon kind of thing. So for those reasons, I'd have to give a good shout out to Mass Effect. A game I thought of though that has really interesting cast of characters, the Fire Emblem on Switch.
Yeah,
Oh,
The
I
three
heard
houses.
I heard that was like the main good thing about that game.
Oh,
is
yes.
its characters.
Oh yes,
They
the characters.
actually all do. All the Fire
of
Emblems have pretty good.
I have to say,
Yeah.
Fire Emblem was really good with its character building and in general world development. Like I always loved it, but that last one especially, and then they got the DLC out where there's like a fourth
fourth
school
house?
in the basement, a fourth
Yeah,
house living in
oh,
the
yeah,
basement.
yeah,
with
yeah,
Grey Wolf.
I only
believe.
played Blue Lions, so I missed a bit because I view the game in one perspective still
Yeah.
only.
Right.
I did Blue Lion, and I started a playthrough as Yellow, but I never got to the end of the Yellow.
Yeah, I did
I-
Blue Lions as
I-
well. Started Red and then just was like, well, they aren't the Blue Lions, so I don't give a fuck.
And even and that's another interesting case study because in that game, picking your color, well, they actually managed to make me pick a color that was meaningful, whereas
Yeah.
Mass Effect failed.
Yeah.
beyond the color you picked, there were choices that were kind of happening outside of that choice. Like the choice to side with or against Rhea, I believe her name was, like the Archbishop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the choice to side with or against her wasn't influenced by the color you picked. That was entirely a personal decision.
Was it?
At least it was on. Yeah, it was. You could choose not to side with her, even on Blue Lion.
Oh, really?
Wait, really?
I did, but you could choose not to.
Oh, I didn't know that. Because I know
You
that
had
the
to-
red
either.
specifically get the
It,
choice.
it hinged on being close to certain characters prior to certain points of the story, but I believe there was an option to side against her anyways.
Interesting.
And
Then I wonder
land
what
in a
would
big-
happen.
That-
Towards
that's
the
the
end, I
thing.
wonder.
and that's why I started playing the yellow playthrough, because the game really pins it as red against blue, and yellow kind of being like
Yeah.
which side are they gonna fall on, kind of thing.
That-
Which is why I was curious to make the experience from the yellow perspective.
But there's also the fourth perspective. Isn't there one where you could just be with Rhea and not with the school at all?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's the one I chose, ultimately.
Whoa, Jesus. Okay, I know people who've done at least one person who's done every choice except for the new DLC. But
Right.
Well, I don't think the new DLC is a choice in and of itself.
No, it's actually it's a standalone thing which
yeah,
allows you
it-
to add these characters into whatever house you pick. I think.
Yeah, it's a side. It's a side
Oh,
story.
okay.
It happens I think it happens in the time skip. If I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken.
something along there.
Okay, I just have to complain about one thing real quickly. Now that we're just bringing this up, the one thing that just drives me crazy in that game, there's one little part where it's only a Blue Lions thing. I guess it could happen if you're playing as Yellow, but there's like a fight where all of them are fighting, and Yellow fights Blue, and I'm like, what? Why is Yellow fighting Blue? Like, there's no reason.
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, we're all gonna fight each other, and Yellow's like, yeah, and I'm like, wait, why are they like what? Why are they?
Why are they
there
doing
is-
this?
I don't want to
there
kill
is
these
a-
guys. It was like misty. The excuse was like, "Oh, there's a lot of fog and it's hard to tell who's who." I'm like, "Bro, you
No,
just
there
stabbed
is-
me 3
Oh,
times."
this. Yeah, exactly.
This is a huge dick. He passes off as this clean cut guy, but he's an opportunistic bastard.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
If you
Okay.
play the yellow storyline, you understand a little better why they sided with red on that one.
What? Okay, I didn't even know he did side. Okay, whoa. Okay, there's probably a lot more depth than I'm expecting. I knew there
This
would be a
game
little
is
bit more.
Insane. I have to give it to that Fire Emblem. This game's story, simple, effective, but so masterfully done.
Mm.
So effective at what it's trying to do. You want to
love you
pin
too.
3 nations like in stark opposition to each other and have them fight. That game is perfect because it gives I don't want to call it infinite replayability, but the replayability is strong with that one.
And one playthrough's long as hell already, so you have to play it
Yeah,
a bunch of
it's the
times.
reason why I never made it through fucking 5 playthroughs at this point. There's just too much.
There's no way. I can't
There's
do
just
it.
too much.
No, exactly. Why are you doing this to yourself? You know.
Like, I'm so curious about Red's playthrough. Like, I can't stop thinking, like, what the fuck happened? I know people who just played Red. I'm like, what does the game look like to you? I'm like, how do you see this game? Because it's
Yeah.
not the same way I see it. So playing as Red, I'm like, I didn't even pick Blue based off of really any good decision. I'm like, oh, Dimitri seems pretty cool. I like Dimitri.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
me, it was that Blue had the best waifus.
Oh my god. Yeah, I know
That's
people
what
who
I
say the
based
same
my
thing.
decision on.
That's
Well, I married
Purely
Ingrid,
what
so-
I based.
very nice.
So although I was to be fair, I was really a big fan of what's her name. Oh fuck, I should know this. Shamir, is that her name?
You're.
She's like the teacher, like the dark archer person.
Oh.
She's like on. She's with the church. She's not like she's a mercenary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
She was like my big and it was a joke a lot in when I was at school.
Mhm.
Like our group chats are always with her face as the profile because of she was my my love interest. Like my one true love was
Of
Shamir.
course. God damn.
Where am I?
All right.
Hi,
Um,
Wall.
I got one more question that we could wrap up on because we are getting close
Sorry,
to.
Jacob.
Sure.
It's okay, but yeah, let's just do one last thing where we can all come in. What is your favorite story told in an RPG?
Oh Jesus Christ!
I cheesed it.
Favorite
My favorite story told in an RPG.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be your favorite RPG for any other reason. Like, it could be just this game in particular for its story, and doesn't have to necessarily be your favorite story in any game if that other game happens to be not an RPG, but specifically an RPG game story.
Fudge. Okay.
Mm. No God.
Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals.
Jesus, what? Hold on, let me look that up. I don't even know what that is.
Lufia 2. I've been biting my tongue on that one for a long time. It's a Super Nintendo game. Lufia
Yeah.
2 is probably my favorite JRPG of all
Damn.
time.
Oh, I have it on my emulator.
Yeah, play
Hey,
it.
there you go.
Finish it. Play it many times, as many times as it's gonna take for you to love it as much as I do, because that game is pure. That game is so good, so tragic, so.
Really? Okay.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Lufia 1 was nothing more than a like Dragon Quest clone, whatever. But Lufia 2 put it up a notch, and it was so good. Too bad it was the last good game that series ever produced. Oh, I just said that out loud. But I actually loved the Game Boy version, the Game Boy Color version, I believe. Lufia Legend Returns. I definitely like that game, mechanically speaking. It had a lot of very interesting stuff happening. But like story and everything included wise, Lufia 2, killer soundtrack, killer story, nice characters. Like simple characters, but effective characters. It was good. I just loved it. Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Oh my god, I'm dying here, man. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
stuck between like Chrono Trigger, Persona 5, and Mass Effect 2.
Yeah.
Those are all so good though.
Yeah, I mean, I got some, like obviously I put KOTOR up there. I'd say The Witcher 3, but I'm not going to count it because it's so dependent on like, at least for like I kind of put it all together with the books. So if we're seeking just strictly a video game RPG story, I mean, I have a soft spot. Like, it's not the most groundbreaking story, but I really love Pillars of Eternity. I think it's a perfect little like fantasy RPG
Is Pillars
story.
of Eternity an RPG? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I haven't
the
played. I
more-
know
more
the
RPG
name, but
It's like Baldur's Gate, like not the new
okay.
Baldur's Gate, like the old
right.
Baldur's
Okay.
Gate.
Yeah. Okay.
It's as RPG as it comes as
Cool.
far as
All right.
Western.
Because my
RPGs.
favorite story in gaming is probably not in an RPG.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing. This is kind of another question, but and it's kind of an interesting one actually. Would you consider Nier Automata an RPG?
Yes.
Okay, well, in that case, that one.
I consider Nier Automata an RPG because some of the endings are accessible only through player choice,
Yeah,
like removing your core,
yeah,
Love
or
that.
blowing yourself up in the middle of the space station, or
yeah.
like there's so many things,
Okay.
or eating the bad fish. Is it like
Yeah,
the drug
yeah. You mean a fish? I died. I was like, "What? Are you fucking kidding me?"
Yeah.
You guys dead?
Yeah, and I'd go as far as say not only one of my favorite RPG or one of the favorite, but like possibly my favorite video game story, just because it's so much a video game story. Like it could not have existed in another medium.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
But on top of that, probably the best story though in an RPG is Planescape.
I knew it.
Damn.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
I've heard this
Really
before
died on
from
this
other
hill, eh?
people too.
dude, I'll die. Not only will I die on this hill, but I will be surrounded by a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
I
lot of
believe
people.
you.
When I looked up when I was like in my late teens, I was like, I should look up what the best stories in games are, and I saw the ones I expected. Red Dead Redemption, some Mass Effect, and I was like, okay, this checks out. And then I saw Planescape. I'm like, what the fuck is Planescape? And I
Is
looked
it
it up.
another
dude.
RuneScape thing?
No.
Rip
Oh, yeah,
off.
RuneScape, that's RPG.
Yeah,
Who would have thought? Best story in gaming is RuneScape? Oh, Jesus.
yeah.
I really
no,
do want to play it though
Yeah.
at some point.
It's like the antagonist is so good. Like it's just the best.
Ah,
And like I said, the companions are like narratively, it's probably like the best RPG I've ever played. From like story to characters to lore, it's unmatched. I mean, it helps that it builds off of D&D lore, but it goes into
Of course.
one of the most like bizarre and like seldom seen aspects of D&D lore. Like there hasn't been a setting book in D&D since second edition for Planescape. Like, and I for the life of me can't figure out why, but it is what it is.
Is Torment Tides of Numenera like connected
No.
in any relevant way?
Spiritually, yes, but no, it's not. It's a completely different universe. It's just
Numenera is
Okay.
connected to another tabletop
Yeah.
system called Cypher.
yeah.
Oh,
But it takes like tries to attack a lot of the same themes and like gameplay ideas and stuff. But no, they're very completely different.
Okay, well, I'll definitely prioritize on my list of games to play. Planescape Torment is really high up there. But
Honestly, and this includes The Witcher, I would want you guys to play Planescape before The Witcher.
Damn.
For those who
Well, it's kind of
haven't.
too late for that. I'm already
Well, I mean, Witcher 3 then.
a few hours
Like,
deep in Witcher 2.
Yeah, but yeah, in general, like if you were asked me, like as a person who loves video games, like and good stories, like the fact that you've lived for nearly 30 years and
I
haven't
have
played
over
it,
30 years,
or in
Jacob.
your
I'm
case,
gonna be
over 30
31
years.
in
Sorry,
June.
I forget that you're a few years older than us. But yeah, the fact that yeah, it's just to me, it's one of those essential experiences if you're gonna claim claim ownership into the hobby of video games. It's one of those ones that you just have to
My
play.
favorite story in gaming, like at large, is a very weird case, and I don't expect a lot of people to resonate with it. But Shovel Knight,
really,
simple. Shovel Knight to me is a gem of storytelling because it shows just how effective simple can be. You keep things basic, you portray them in a way, especially with the way it built on its own lore and on its own stories through the DLCs. The grand picture that it paints through the story of Shovel Knight and of the 3 DLCs at this point, it's interesting. It gives a lot of weight and a lot of feeling to the few characters that you actually interact with. Like Plague Knight is probably like it's me in video game form. Because I resonated so strongly with who he was, with what his quest was, with how it turned out in the end, that I was like, man, this story was written for me. It was written for me to read and contemplate and play a part in. And that felt so... I was going to use the word empowering, but it's bigger than that. It's more than to give power. It's a resonance with the universe that's just so grand. Where like that's why I read stories, to find these points of resonance in the universe.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like how I felt after playing Planescape, but also more recently Nier. Like especially, it's just like this was the
Especially
game I was
Nier.
meant to play at this time. And it's
Nier
just,
was so
wow.
beautiful on every level.
Yeah,
On every level, the visuals, the audio, the story, with the waifu
gameplay.
character.
The gameplay's
it's
also
just,
super fun.
Oh, the gameplay is so tight. It's
Yeah.
so tight.
it was my first
So
experience with it's Platinum Games, right? That did the
Yeah.
combat for that. It was my first experience with a Platinum game, and I was just like, oh my god!
I
And
was
this is not
like,
even like
where
their
is this
strongest
studio?
combat system. Like,
what?
please. Yeah, it
You're
was so
telling me
good.
they've made other, like when I found out about that games and everybody was like, yeah, it's a follow up to another game. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
They have other games? And my mind was just exploded
Yeah.
that day.
Well, we're releasing soon a remaster-ish of the first Nier.
Replicant.
Yeah, which I played. I have on 360, and I played a bit. It's a little more dated than Automata, obviously, but still, I never beat it. But it's super interesting. I'm definitely going to pick it up if it's remastered
Yeah, me too.
and plays like Automata. Like, yes, please.
If it
Because the
plays
combat
even
definitely
just a
wasn't
little
the
bit like
same.
it, if it plays even just a little bit like it.
Yeah, I think
don't
the one
care.
like it's just going to play. It's like almost the same engine. It looks like, and like the same stuff. So I imagine it will be like Automata, which means I will buy it and like flow my life essence into it.
I will bite and indulge forever
Yeah.
in the greatness of video games.
We're talking about a story, and we even brought up non-combat possibilities. And I completely forgot to mention that, like, Disco Elysium, which is an RPG,
Yeah.
but it is like a very bizarre take on it in terms of how they approach, like, what's the gameplay? You're basically exploring and talking. There's situations where you could end up in a combat scenario, but any combat scenario which are very, very few, like less than 5. If you get into combat, it's basically like any other situation in that game. It's like you do a dice roll, and if your stats are high, maybe something good will happen, or something will kill you for no reason. But the game is an RPG. I would definitely consider that an RPG. There's stats. You play as a character. There's a lot of meaningful decisions, and there's like no combat and great writing. So I mean, I've heard that it's been related to Planescape Torment in terms of quality of writing. So
Yeah, and I got similar vibes from it, just like the way it's like tied to Numenera that Numenera has like almost no combat encounters, and if you have them, they're bad. Don't do them.
Yeah, even as a tabletop system, the Numenera system is more based on discovery and exploration and adventure rather than just combat.
Yeah. And like Planescape too, like it has more of a combat system than those games, but it's really like, especially it's compared to the other D&D games that came out at the time, like it's not like Baldur's Gate is the whole package. Icewind Dale's the combat, Planescape's the story. Like, and yeah, and Planescape has the best setting because it's so unique and weird and yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, is there anything else anyone want to say? Any other last minute questions
closing
or
remarks?
comments or insults or whatever? Get it all out.
You're all fucking crazy.
There we go.
I think we basically
Ooh, I died.
don't die.
I think we achieved absolutely nothing today, and I love it. We had a fun conversation about video games, which is worth.
Yeah, that's what Mondays are for now.